In this video, we're going to be breaking down 3 hours of Simpsons conspiracies. Let's get started with our first one. In episode Homer's Enemy, Frank Grimes arrives at the Springfield nuclear power plant as a new employee who's earned everything through hard work, only to witness Homer Simpson, an incompetent, dangerous buffoon, somehow thriving despite catastrophic safety violations. After spending the episode trying to expose Homer's incompetence, Grimes has a mental breakdown, starts imitating Homer's reckless behavior, electrocutes himself, and dies. What seems like a dark comedy about workplace jealousy is actually proof that Homer exists in a protected reality bubble that punishes anyone who challenges it. Frank Grimes didn't go insane. He saw the truth, and the universe killed him for it. The setup tells you everything about Frank Grimes before he even meets Homer. The episode opens with a news segment about Grimes' life story. Abandoned by his parents at age 4, he survived by his wits, worked his way through school while holding multiple jobs, and earned his degree by correspondence at 17 while in a silo explosion that left him hospitalized. He's the American dream personified. Every accomplishment required sacrifice, pain, and relentless effort. When Mr. Burns sees Grimes' story on TV, he's so moved by this hard-working man that he immediately hires him for the nuclear plant. Grimes arrives expecting his dedication to finally be rewarded with stable employment and respect. Then he meets Homer Simpson. Grimes' first encounter with Homer reveals the fundamental impossibility he's facing. Homer casually mentions he's the safety inspector, and Grimes congratulates him on such an important position. Homer responds by falling asleep mid-conversation and drooling on important safety documents. Grimes watches in horror as Homer continues sleeping, snoring, and drooling while alarms go off around him. When Homer wakes up, he has no memory of the conversation and wanders away to eat donuts. Grimes stands there processing what he just witnessed. A man who cannot stay awake during working hours holds the position responsible for preventing nuclear meltdowns. This pattern repeats throughout Grimes' time at the plant. He observes Homer creating safety violations constantly. Homer stores highly toxic waste in regular desk drawers. He leaves radioactive rods sitting on counters. He eats while handling nuclear material. He falls asleep at his post multiple times per shift. Every single action Homer takes should result in immediate termination, criminal prosecution, or death from radiation exposure. None of these consequences occur. Homer continues working, continues getting paid, continues existing in blatant violation of physics, labor law, and basic competence standards. Grimes tries pointing out these violations to other employees. Nobody cares. Lenny and Carl have worked with Homer for years and just shrug when Grimes explains that Homer's behavior is catastrophically dangerous. When Grimes brings up specific examples of Homer nearly causing meltdowns, they respond with variations of, "Yeah, that's Homer." The entire plant has normalized Homer's incompetence to the point where catastrophic safety violations get treated as personality quirks. Grimes realizes he's not dealing with regular workplace dysfunction. He's dealing with a protected individual who operates under different rules than everyone else. Here's where Grimes makes his fatal mistake. He decides to prove Homer's incompetence to everyone by inviting Homer to dinner at his apartment. Grimes lives in a small space between 2 bowling alleys, the only thing he can afford despite his education and work ethic. Homer shows up and immediately starts touching Grimes' belongings without permission, breaking his model ships and making himself comfortable in ways that demonstrate complete lack of social awareness. When Grimes shows Homer his framed correspondence degree, Homer casually mentions his own lack of education. Grimes asks how Homer got his job. Homer explains he showed up after the previous guy got radiation poisoning and they hired him on the spot. No qualifications, no training, no background check, just wrong place at the right time. Grimes' voice starts cracking as he processes this information. He's worked his entire life for basic stability while Homer stumbled into a high-paying union job by accident. The universe handed Homer everything Grimes earned through suffering. When Grimes tries to explain this injustice to Homer, Homer responds by falling asleep on Grimes' couch. Grimes snaps and kicks Homer out, screaming about the unfairness of their situations. Homer leaves confused, thinking Grimes is just having a bad day. He doesn't understand that Grimes has identified him as an anomaly. The breaking point comes when Homer enters a children's power plant design contest. An adult competing against elementary school students for no apparent reason except he wanted to. Grimes watches the awards ceremony where Homer's obviously terrible model wins first place. The judges praise Homer's innovative design despite it being objectively worse than the children's submissions. One kid built a functional miniature reactor. Another designed efficient cooling systems. Homer submitted a model with toys glued to cardboard that somehow won. The universe literally rewrote competition results to protect Homer from losing to children. Grimes stands up during the ceremony and delivers his final speech. He lists every example of Homer's incompetence: sleeping at work, causing near meltdowns, lack of training or qualifications, the model airplane currently crashing in the background as they speak. He points to Homer's house, his car, his family, all the things Homer has, despite doing nothing to earn them. Grimes then announces he's going to show everyone what happens when you act like Homer Simpson. He starts imitating Homer's behavior, eating uranium, touching high-voltage equipment, running through the plant causing chaos. He yells, "I don't need safety gloves because I'm Homer Simpson!" and grabs live electrical wires with his bare hands. Frank Grimes electrocutes himself to death instantly. The funeral scene confirms everything. Everyone attends Grimes's burial, including Homer, who falls asleep during the service and starts dreaming about winning a contest. He talks in his sleep saying, "Change the channel, Marge." The mourners laugh. Lenny says, "That's our Homer," while standing over Grimes's casket. They're literally burying the man who died, proving Homer's protected status, and their response to Homer disrupting the funeral is affectionate amusement. The universe showed them Homer can sleep through a funeral for a man he killed, and they'll still love him. The episode treats this as the punchline. Homer's such a lovable oaf that even his victim's funeral becomes about Homer being Homer. But what the episode actually documents is cosmic horror. Frank Grimes identified that Homer Simpson doesn't follow normal physical laws. Homer survives radiation exposure that kills others. He maintains employment despite incompetence that should cause immediate termination. He wins contests against superior competitors. He faces zero consequences for actions that destroy other people's lives. Grimes tested whether Homer's protection was environmental or personal by imitating Homer's exact behavior. The moment Grimes touched those wires, electricity killed him instantly. Homer touches the same equipment daily and walks away fine. This proves Homer's invincibility is attached to Homer specifically, not to the situation or location. Anyone else attempting Homer's behavior faces normal consequences. Physics applies to them, labor law applies to them, death applies to them. Homer exists in a protected bubble where reality bends to accommodate his continued survival regardless of how many rules he violates. Throughout the series, this pattern repeats constantly. Homer survives being shot in the head multiple times. He survives radiation exposure that should kill him within hours. He survives falls that crush his body into impossible shapes, then pops back to normal form. He gets strangled by Bart regularly and never suffers brain damage from oxygen deprivation. He causes nuclear meltdowns and faces zero prosecution. He's been fired and rehired dozens of times because Burns literally cannot keep him fired. The universe won't allow it. Homer has a job because Homer must have a job for Springfield to function. His employment status is mandated by forces beyond human authority. The implications wreck everything about how The Simpsons operates. Every character in Springfield has noticed Homer's protected status. They reference it constantly. They make jokes about Homer surviving impossible situations. They've all witnessed Homer break reality and just shrugged because that's Homer. But Frank Grimes was the first person to actually challenge it. He didn't just notice Homer's invincibility. He tried to prove it was unfair and dangerous. He demanded accountability for Homer's violations. He used himself as a test case to demonstrate that Homer's protection doesn't extend to others. The universe killed him for it. Not gradually, not through accumulated consequences. Instantly. The moment Grimes tried to expose Homer's anomalous nature by replicating his behavior, electricity killed him so fast he didn't have time to reconsider. His death serves as a warning to everyone else in Springfield. You can live alongside Homer. You can work with Homer. You can even love Homer. But you cannot challenge the fundamental truth that Homer Simpson operates under different rules than you. Anyone who tries to prove Homer should face consequences will face them instead. This explains why nobody in Springfield ever seriously tries to stop Homer. Ned Flanders gets abused by Homer constantly and just forgives him. Moe gets pranked called daily and never changes his number. Barney enables Homer's alcoholism without question. Mr. Burns fires Homer repeatedly and immediately rehires him. Everyone has learned the same lesson Grimes learned too late. Homer is protected by forces beyond their understanding, and the only way to survive in his presence is acceptance. They've all seen people who challenged Homer suffer while Homer walks away unharmed. They know better than to try. Frank Grimes figured it out in one episode. He saw that Homer Simpson breaks reality and nobody acknowledges it. He tried to expose it, prove it, and force people to see it, and the universe itself reached down and stopped him permanently. That's not workplace comedy. That's cosmic horror, where challenging the protagonist gets you executed by electricity in front of witnesses who immediately forget you existed. Grimes's grave sits somewhere in Springfield with a headstone nobody visits. Meanwhile, Homer's still sleeping at work, still causing meltdowns, still protected by plot armor so strong it kills anyone who notices it's there. That's eldritch protection disguised as sitcom status quo. That's a reality warping field that erases threats to maintain Homer's existence. Frank Grimes was the only person in Springfield brave enough or desperate enough to challenge it directly. He died instantly, and everyone learned to love their anomalous neighbor instead of joining Grimy in the ground. Now let's move on to the next conspiracy. In the segment Steamed Hams from 22 short films about Springfield, Principal Skinner invites Superintendent Chalmers to his house for lunch. But when his roast burns, he sneaks to Krusty Burger, buys fast food, and passes it off as his own cooking with increasingly absurd lies. What seems like awkward comedy about social deception is actually documenting a hostage situation where Skinner prevents Chalmers from leaving while destroying evidence of financial crimes. Chalmers' initial reaction to the invitation reveals how unusual this is. When Skinner mentions having him over for lunch, Chalmers looks surprised and slightly suspicious. They don't socialize. Superintendents don't visit principals' homes for casual meals. This happens during investigations, not friendships. Chalmers arrives at the exact time his investigation into school finances would require documentation that Skinner needs to destroy. The kitchen fire isn't a cooking accident, it's arson covering embezzlement evidence. The roast burning happens immediately before Chalmers even sits down. Skinner checks the oven and discovers the entire meal engulfed in flames. His panic isn't about disappointing a guest. It's about timing. He needed Chalmers occupied while documents burned in another room, but the food fire started too early. Now he has to improvise. He tells Chalmers everything's fine while smoke billows from the kitchen. Chalmers asks if something's burning. Skinner claims he's steaming clams, a traditional Albany expression for his cooking style. Chalmers is from Utica and has never heard this phrase. Skinner's already been caught in a lie within 3 minutes. Skinner climbs out his kitchen window, runs to Krusty Burger, and purchases fast food, while Chalmers sits alone in the dining room. When Skinner returns through the window, the kitchen is fully engulfed in flames. He ignores this and brings the fast food to the table, claiming he made it himself. Chalmers immediately recognizes Krusty Burger, packaging, and questions whether Skinner prepared this meal. Skinner invents increasingly desperate explanations. The burgers are steamed hams. It's a regional dialect. He learned the recipe from his mother in Albany. Each lie contradicts the previous one, but Skinner continues because the alternative is letting Chalmers leave and discover what's actually happening. Chalmers tries to leave multiple times. He stands up. He moves toward the door. Each time, Skinner physically interposes himself or invents new distractions. When Chalmers gets suspicious about the burgers looking exactly like Krusty Burger products, Skinner claims it's an unfair comparison. When smoke becomes visible from the dining room, Skinner calls it steam from the steamed clams they're having despite serving hamburgers. When Chalmers directly states he thought they were having steamed clams, Skinner pivots to calling them steamed hams. The contradictions pile up because Skinner's not trying to maintain a coherent story. He's trying to prevent Chalmers from accessing other rooms. The isometric exercise scene exposes Skinner's desperation. Chalmers stands to leave, and Skinner jumps in front of him, doing exaggerated leg stretches while claiming he's working his calves on the windowsill. Chalmers has to physically navigate around Skinner to move toward the door. This is physical obstruction. When Chalmers finally gets to the front door and opens it, he sees the kitchen fully. Ablaze through the doorway, flames are consuming the house. Chalmers asks why there's smoke coming out of the oven if they're having steamed hams. Skinner looks directly at the fire and claims it's not smoke, it's steam. Steam from the steamed clams. Chalmers corrects him that they're having steamed hams. Skinner agrees, while the house burns behind him. Here's where Skinner's lies become diagnostic. When someone lies about verifiable reality, like flames being steam, they've moved beyond deception into pathological territory. Chalmers says to Skinner's face that he's a pathological liar, not exaggerating for effect, not making a joke, diagnosing him with a psychological condition characterized by compulsive dishonesty. Skinner doesn't deny it. He just smiles and continues lying. When Chalmers points out the house is on fire, Skinner claims it's Aurora Borealis, the northern lights, visible in this kitchen, localized entirely within this room. At this time of year, in this part of the country, Chalmers asks if he can see it. Skinner says no. That's the admission. If Aurora Borealis were actually in the kitchen, showing Chalmers would support the lie. Refusing proves Skinner knows there's something in that kitchen he cannot let Chalmers see. Not just burnt food, not just fire damage, something that would expose crimes serious enough that Skinner chose to burn down his house rather than allow discovery. What could be worth burning your house down to hide? Financial records showing years of embezzlement, student records showing grade fraud, evidence of misappropriated funds, something that would end Skinner's career and result in criminal prosecution. The lunch invitation was never about socializing. It was about keeping Chalmers in one room while evidence burned in another. The fast food distraction was improvised when the fire spread too quickly. Every lie after that was buying time for documents to become ash. Chalmers finally escapes when the smoke becomes too thick to breathe. He stumbles out coughing while Skinner stays behind. Skinner's mother calls from upstairs asking about the Aurora Borealis. Skinner yells back that it's just the northern lights while his house collapses around him. He chose complete destruction of his home over letting an authority figure examine his kitchen. That's not social anxiety. That's destroying evidence so thoroughly that investigators won't have enough left to build a case. The segment ends with Skinner standing outside his burning house, watching it collapse while Chalmers drives away. Skinner gives a thumbs up. The entire building is gone. Whatever was inside is ash. The investigation Chalmers came to conduct cannot proceed because the evidence no longer exists. Skinner successfully destroyed everything worth investigating and trapped the investigator long enough to ensure complete destruction. His lies about steamed hams and Aurora Borealis weren't failures of deception. They were, successful delay tactics that kept Chalmers from accessing rooms until those rooms were gone. Throughout the series, Skinner demonstrates competence in crisis situations despite being portrayed as ineffectual. He's a decorated Vietnam veteran with survival training. He's managed Springfield Elementary for decades despite impossible conditions. He's not the bumbling fool he pretends to be. The steamed hams incident shows his actual capabilities when threatened. Improvise cover story, delay authority, destroy evidence, maintain plausible deniability, survive investigation. Those are not skills you develop through normal school administration. Those are skills you develop through repeated criminal activity requiring evidence destruction. Skinner burned his house down rather than face prosecution for whatever he'd been hiding in that kitchen. Chalmers escaped with smoke inhalation and no evidence to support investigation. The case closed because there was no case anymore. Just ashes and lies about regional dialects, and Skinner kept his job because nobody could prove what burned. That's not a failed social situation. That's successful criminal evidence destruction executed under pressure while maintaining eye contact with the investigating officer. Let's shift over to the next conspiracy. In the two-part episode, Who Shot Mr. Burns? Mr. Burns blocks out the sun to force Springfield to use his electricity, creating widespread suffering. Someone shoots Burns in the town square. After an entire episode of suspects and investigations, the reveal shows Maggie Simpson pulled the trigger when Burns tried to steal her lollipop. What seems like a dark comedy twist where a baby accidentally shoots someone is actually proof that Maggie is a trained killer who's eliminated multiple targets throughout the series, and Springfield's justice system deliberately protects her. The investigation treats every adult in Springfield as a suspect before considering Maggie. Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, Moe, Barney, Smithers, even Santa's little helper all face interrogation. Chief Wiggum constructs elaborate theories about motive and opportunity for dozens of citizens. The entire two-part episode builds mystery around which adult hated Burns enough to shoot him. This misdirection is intentional. By focusing on adults with obvious motives, the investigation avoids examining the actual shooter until forced to by physical evidence. Burns survives the shooting long enough to provide clues. He collapses on a sundial, his body positioning spelling out letters. The blood trail and his arm position point to W and S. Everyone assumes this means Wayland Smith's. Smithers becomes the prime suspect despite having no access to the gun and being visibly distraught about Burns's condition. The clue actually means M and S because Burns fell in the opposite direction. MS Maggie Simpson. Burns was trying to identify his shooter from the beginning, and everyone deliberately misread the evidence to protect a baby. The DNA evidence confirms Maggie as the shooter. Her pacifier is found at the crime scene. Police test it and match her DNA to genetic material on the gun. This is incontrovertible physical evidence placing Maggie at the scene, handling the weapon, and being present during the shooting. Wiggum looks at this evidence and makes an immediate decision not to prosecute. Not because the case is weak, not because of insufficient evidence, because prosecuting a baby seems pointless to him. He says out loud what would be the point. That's not a legal standard, that's a policy decision that some people are above prosecution regardless of evidence. What actually happened in the town square reveals Maggie's training. Burns confronts the Simpson family after they interfere with his sun-blocking machine. He's angry and looking for revenge. When he sees Maggie with her lollipop, he tries to steal it. This triggers Maggie's defensive response. Burns reaches for the lollipop, and Maggie's jacket falls open, revealing the gun. Burns's own gun, which he dropped earlier. Maggie picks it up with perfect grip positioning. Burns reaches for the gun, and it fires into his chest. The official story claims Burns accidentally shot himself while trying to retrieve the weapon. But watch the sequence carefully. Maggie had the gun. Burns reached. The gun fired. Burns fell. Maggie walked away. That's not accidental discharge, that's defensive shooting. Maggie identified a threat, maintained weapon control, and eliminated the threat when he tried to disarm her. That's training. Babies don't instinctively understand how to hold guns or when to fire them. Maggie somehow knew to keep her finger near the trigger and fire when Burns got too close. Either she's been trained or she's a natural prodigy with firearms. Either explanation is terrifying for a 1-year-old. This isn't Maggie's first elimination. Throughout the series, Maggie demonstrates proficiency with weapons that should be impossible for an infant. In the episode Homer the Great, mobsters attack the Simpson family. Maggie picks up a rifle and shoots one of them dead with perfect aim. The family doesn't react with shock or horror. They just continue their activity while Maggie provides covering fire. In the Simpsons movie, Maggie saves Homer's life by shooting through a window with a sniper rifle, hitting her target from significant distance. The movie treats this as a callback joke, but it's actually confirmation that Maggie has been practicing long-range marksmanship. Her intelligence explains some of this capability. Maggie is clearly far more intelligent than she appears. She can drive cars, operate complex machinery, and understand adult conversations despite never speaking. The episode Smart and Smarter reveals Maggie's IQ is higher than Lisa's, making her the most intelligent family member. She's been hiding this intelligence deliberately, choosing to present as a normal baby while possessing genius-level cognitive abilities. A genius who can drive cars and shoot rifles is effectively an adult operator in a baby's body. The town's protection of Maggie goes beyond Chief Wiggum. Every institution in Springfield has collectively decided that Maggie's actions, regardless of lethality, will face no consequences. The hospital treats Burns without investigating how a baby gained access to his gun. The police closed the investigation immediately upon confirming Maggie as the shooter. The media never reports that Springfield's sun-blocking villain was shot by an infant. Everyone agrees that Maggie's identity as the shooter will remain quietly known but never officially acknowledged. Burns himself accepts this outcome. When he wakes in the hospital and remembers what happened, he doesn't demand prosecution. He doesn't press charges. He just acknowledges that Maggie shot him and moves on. A billionaire with unlimited legal resources chooses not to pursue the infant who shot him in the chest. That acceptance reveals recognition. Burns understands that Maggie is protected by something beyond normal legal structures. Attempting to prosecute her would expose his own vulnerability, and Burns would rather pretend the shooting didn't happen than admit a baby successfully eliminated him as a threat. The pattern across episodes establishes Maggie as Springfield's most effective enforcer. When mobsters threaten the family, Maggie eliminates them. When Burns threatens the town, Maggie shoots him. When anyone presents clear danger to people Maggie cares about, that person faces immediate lethal response from an infant who never misses. She's not a random baby who picked up a gun. She's a trained asset who operates with precision and faces zero accountability for her eliminations. Who trained her? The episode doesn't answer this, but someone taught Maggie to shoot. Someone gave her access to weapons. Someone determined that Springfield needed a protected enforcer who could eliminate threats while hiding behind the legal immunity of infancy. Babies cannot be prosecuted. Babies cannot testify. Babies cannot be cross-examined. Maggie is the perfect assassin because her age makes her legally invisible, while her intelligence makes her operationally effective. The implications wreck the entire justice system in Springfield. The town has collectively decided that certain people are above the law, and Maggie Simpson is one of them. She can kill with immunity because her age provides permanent legal cover. Every authority figure knows this and chooses to maintain it. Police know. Prosecutors know. Judges know. The media knows. Everyone agrees that Maggie's kills will be classified as accidents, self-defense, or simply ignored. This isn't protecting an innocent child. This is maintaining a state-sanctioned enforcement asset that operates outside legal oversight. Burns survived because Maggie showed mercy. The gun fired into his chest, not his head. A trained killer, aiming for lethality, would have made a headshot. Maggie chose to wound, not kill. That restraint proves intentionality. She controlled the shot placement. She could have killed Burns easily but decided not to. That decision suggests Maggie operates under rules of engagement, not panic responses. Someone taught her when to kill and when to wound. Someone gave her discretion. That's not a baby defending herself. That's an operative executing a mission with appropriate force levels. Springfield's acceptance of infant assassination reveals deeper dysfunction. The town needed someone to shoot Burns because he'd made everyone's life miserable. But no adult could do it without facing murder charges. So when Maggie shot him, everyone collectively agreed to pretend it was an accident. The investigation's misdirection toward adult suspects was theater. Wiggum knew from the DNA evidence that Maggie did it. Everything after that was performance to justify not prosecuting an infant who shot a billionaire in public. And Maggie's still out there, still carrying weapons, still making elimination decisions, still protected by a justice system that has decided her kills benefit the town. She's Springfield's secret weapon, and she wears a bow. That's state-sanctioned violence disguised as baby hijinks. That's a trained killer who never faces consequences, because everyone agrees her targets deserve it. Burns got shot by a baby, and nobody cared, because Burns was terrible. And that precedent means Maggie can shoot anyone Springfield decides is terrible, and the town will just call it an accident again. All right, let's head into the next conspiracy. In episode Bart Gets an F, Bart faces being held back in 4th grade unless he passes a history test. Despite studying with genuine effort, hiring a tutor, and actually caring for once, he fails the test. Only when he spontaneously references historical facts about the Pilgrims during a desperate plea does Mrs. Crabapple give him a D- and pass him. What seems like an uplifting story about last-minute success is actually exposing how Springfield Elementary's teachers intentionally fail students to maintain funding, and only pass them when they accidentally prove they learned despite the system's sabotage. Mrs. Crabapple announces that Bart will be held back if he fails one more test. This creates artificial pressure that serves the school's financial interests. Students who repeat grades generate additional funding through remedial and special education programs. Each student held back represents another year of federal money flowing into Springfield Elementary. Bart passing 4th grade means losing that funding stream. Mrs. Crabapple has a financial incentive to fail him regardless of his actual learning. Bart responds to this threat by actually trying. He abandons his usual troublemaking and dedicates himself to studying. He partners with Martin Prince, the class genius, for intensive tutoring sessions. Martin creates flashcards, timelines, and study guides. They spend hours reviewing material. Bart memorizes dates, names, and historical events. He works harder than he's ever worked on anything academic. The studying montage shows genuine effort and visible improvement in Bart's understanding. He's learning the material. He knows the answers. The test destroys him anyway. Bart sits down with the exam and immediately panics. The questions are formatted in ways that make memorized information inaccessible. Multiple choice questions with confusing wording, essay prompts that require specific phrasing. True-false statements designed to trick students who know the material but second-guess themselves. Bart's hands shake as he tries to recall everything Martin taught him. He writes answers, erases them, writes different answers. The test isn't measuring what Bart learned. It's measuring his ability to navigate deliberately confusing test design. When Mrs. Crabapple grades the exam, Bart fails despite demonstrating knowledge. The grade doesn't reflect understanding. It reflects test-taking skill, which wasn't what Martin tutored. Bart learned history. He didn't learn how to decode Mrs. Crabapple's specific testing format. The school benefits from this distinction because it allows them to fail students who learned material but can't prove it through arbitrary assessment methods. Keep students failing tests. Keep them repeating grades. Keep the funding flowing. Bart breaks down in Mrs. Crabapple's office after receiving his failing grade. He begs for another chance. He cries. He explains how hard he studied and how much he tried. During this desperate plea, he spontaneously references the Pilgrims eating food that made them sick during their first winter. He correctly identifies historical details about Native American assistance and survival strategies. He demonstrates specific knowledge of colonial history while arguing that he deserves to pass. These are facts from the test material delivered through conversation instead of written exam. Mrs. Crabapple stops him mid-sentence. She realizes Bart actually knows the material. He just couldn't access it during the formal test. She makes a decision that reveals how the system actually works. She gives him a D- based on his verbal demonstration of knowledge, not his written test performance. This proves the test was never about measuring learning. It was about maintaining failure rates. When Bart accidentally demonstrated knowledge in a format that couldn't be ignored, Mrs. Crabapple had to pass him to avoid exposing that students are being failed deliberately. The D- is the minimum possible passing grade, not a C-, not a D. A D-, which is the absolute floor for advancement. Mrs. Crabapple gave Bart the lowest grade that technically allows progression because giving him anything higher would acknowledge that he earned it. The D- says you barely passed and you should feel lucky. It's not recognition of learning. It's damage control after a student accidentally proved he deserved better. Bart celebrates the D- like it's an A because he understands what just happened. He escaped being held back despite the system designing his test to fail him. The celebration isn't about academic achievement, it's about survival. He beat a rigged game through accidental verbal demonstration after the official assessment failed him. That's not success. That's barely avoiding institutional sabotage. Other students aren't as lucky. Throughout the series, Springfield Elementary shows the same students in the same grades year after year. There are kids in fourth grade who've been in fourth grade for multiple seasons. Background characters who appear in Bart's class in Season 2 are still in Bart's class in Season 10. They're not different students with the same character models. They're actual repeating students that the school has trapped in perpetual fourth grade. Some have been held back so many times they're entering puberty while still in elementary school. The school has created a permanent underclass of failing students who generate continuous remedial funding. The financial structure rewards this system. Federal education funding allocates more money for students in remedial programs, special education, and extended grade repetition. Springfield Elementary maximizes this funding by keeping students cycling through the same grades repeatedly. Each repeated year brings in fresh funding for remedial instruction, testing accommodations, and intervention programs. The school profits from failure, which means teachers have incentive to maintain failure rates regardless of actual learning. Mrs. Crabapple's moment of mercy with Bart proves she knows the system is broken. She gave him a passing grade based on verbal demonstration because she recognized he'd learned the material, but she only did this after Bart's spontaneous outburst made it impossible to ignore. If Bart had quietly accepted his failing grade and left her office, she would have held him back despite knowing he understood the material. The system requires her to fail students unless they accidentally expose the fraud. Springfield Elementary has trapped dozens of students in this cycle. They study, fail tests designed to ensure failure, get held back, repeat the grade with the same rigged assessments, and generate funding through continuous enrollment in remedial programs. Some students eventually age out and drop out. Others somehow escape like Bart did through accidental demonstrations that force teachers to acknowledge learning. But most stay trapped, repeating grades indefinitely while the school extracts federal funding from their perpetual failure. The pattern extends beyond Bart's experience. Lisa, who's genuinely gifted, faces different sabotage methods. Teachers don't fail her because that would be obviously fraudulent. Instead, they deny her advanced placement, refuse to acknowledge her talents, and keep her in standard curriculum to maintain classroom sizes for funding formulas. The school benefits from having a gifted student in regular classes because it makes their test averages look better without paying for actual gifted education programs. Principal Skinner oversees this entire operation. He knows exactly what's happening. He approves testing formats designed to fail students. He denies grade advancement appeals. He maintains remedial programs that generate funding while providing minimal actual remediation. When Superintendent Chalmers audits the school, Skinner provides statistics showing improvement that are based on manipulated testing data. The fraud goes to the top, and everyone benefits except the students trapped in its machinery. Bart escaped fourth grade, but somewhere in Springfield Elementary, a kid who studied just as hard is sitting in Mrs. Crabapple's office being told they failed again, and they'll repeat fourth grade next year, and the year after, and the school will collect funding for their continuous remedial education while never actually helping them pass. That's systematic educational fraud operating in plain sight, disguised as academic standards. Bart got his D- through luck and timing. Everyone else is still trapped. Time to shift into the next conspiracy. In episode Das Bus, Otto drives a school bus full of students to a Model UN conference, crashes into the ocean, and abandons them on a deserted island. The kids quickly descend into Lord of the Flies savagery, forming tribes, hunting a wild boar, and turning on each other. Meanwhile, Homer starts an internet company that immediately fails. What seems like a satirical survival story is actually documenting Springfield Elementary's deliberate experiment in child psychology, where faculty intentionally crash students on an island to observe how quickly children revert to primitive violence. Otto's driving before the crash shows deliberate recklessness that goes beyond his usual incompetence. He's ignoring every safety protocol, taking unnecessary risks, and actively steering toward danger. When other characters warn him about hazards ahead, he accelerates instead of avoiding them. A normal driver experiencing mechanical problems would pull over. Otto crashes directly into the ocean at a location that happens to have a convenient nearby island. That's not accident navigation, that's hitting a predetermined target. The student selection for this trip reveals careful curation. Not every Springfield elementary student went to the Model UN conference. Specific children were chosen for this bus. Bart, Lisa, Milhouse, Nelson, Ralph, Martin, each represents a different psychological profile. Bart, the rebellious leader. Lisa, the intellectual voice of reason. Martin, the ineffectual authority figure. Nelson, the aggressive enforcer. This isn't random assignment. Someone selected these specific personality types to observe how they would interact under survival stress. Otto abandons them immediately after the crash. He doesn't attempt rescue. He doesn't stay with the students to ensure their safety. He doesn't radio for help before leaving. He swims away from the sinking bus and disappears, leaving children stranded with no adult supervision, no supplies, and no communication equipment. A responsible bus driver who accidentally crashed would stay with the students or immediately seek rescue. Otto completed his delivery and departed. His job was getting them to the island. What happened after wasn't his concern. The island itself appears too convenient. There's fresh water, there's edible vegetation, there's a wild boar that appears exactly when the students start discussing food scarcity. Deserted islands don't usually have reliable food sources and aggressive wildlife in the precise proportions necessary to create survival drama. Someone stocked this island with resources that would force the students into hunting and gathering behavior while providing just enough sustenance to keep them alive for the duration of the study. The students' behavioral descent follows Lord of the Flies almost exactly. Within hours, they've rejected Martin's intellectual leadership in favor of Bart's charismatic authority. They create tribal symbols and territorial boundaries. They hunt the boar using primitive weapons they construct from island materials. They turn on each other when resources become scarce. This rapid progression from civilized children to tribal warriors happens too quickly to be organic. It's following a template that suggests previous observations of similar scenarios. Lisa recognizes the pattern and tries to warn the others. She specifically mentions Lord of the Flies and how the book documented children's descent into savagery under survival conditions. The other students ignore her warnings and proceed to reenact the exact behaviors she predicted. This is either incredible coincidence or confirmation that the scenario was designed to produce Lord of the Flies outcomes. Someone wanted to see if the book's fictional premise would manifest in reality when real children face similar conditions. The timeline reveals the experiment's parameters. The students are on the island for approximately 3 days based on the position of the sun and their dialogue about time passing. 3 days is long enough to observe initial behavioral changes without risking permanent psychological damage or actual deaths. It's also short enough that parents won't organize independent rescue efforts or involve federal authorities in missing children investigations. Springfield Elementary filed the trip paperwork listing an extended conference duration, giving them a window to conduct observation without parental interference. No rescue attempt is made during those 3 days, despite multiple people knowing the student's route and expected return time. Principal Skinner doesn't send search parties. Parents don't demand updates. The Coast Guard doesn't investigate a school bus crashing into the ocean. Everyone with authority to initiate rescue operations waits patiently while children fight for survival on an island. That collective inaction proves coordination. The adults know where the students are and have agreed to let the experiment continue. The boar hunt shows how far the behavioral degradation progresses. Students who've never hurt animals in their lives are chasing a wild pig with spears, chanting tribal calls, and planning to kill it for food. They're not hunting because they're starving. They've only been on the island for days and have access to fruit and other vegetation. They're hunting because the scenario has triggered primitive dominance behaviors. The hunt isn't about food. It's about establishing hierarchy through controlled violence. Martin's attempted leadership failure demonstrates the social dynamics being studied. He tries to maintain civilized order by invoking rules, reason, and democratic processes. The other students immediately reject his authority and follow Bart instead, who promises action over deliberation. This replicates Lord of the Flies' core thesis that intellectual authority collapses under survival pressure, while charismatic dominance prevails. Someone wanted to verify whether this pattern would repeat with real children, and they're watching it happen in real time. The experiment's observational apparatus isn't shown directly, but evidence suggests surveillance. How would Springfield Elementary gather data if they weren't monitoring the island? The entire purpose of stranding students is to observe their behavior. That requires cameras, recording equipment, or direct observation posts. The island must have hidden surveillance systems documenting every tribal ritual, hunting attempt, and social confrontation. Someone is watching these children descend into violence and taking notes. The rescue timing confirms deliberate control. After exactly enough time to observe primitive behavior emerge, but before anyone gets seriously hurt, authorities arrive and retrieve the students. Not parents, not random passing boats. Official school representatives who know exactly where to find them and arrive at the precise moment when the experiment has gathered sufficient data. The students board the rescue vessel and return to Springfield, where they're immediately reintegrated into normal school life with zero psychological follow-up or trauma counseling. Principal Skinner files the incident report as a transportation accident with no casualties. Parents are told their children are safe and the bus driver has been reprimanded. Nobody investigates why a school bus crashed into the ocean at a specific location with a conveniently located island nearby. Nobody questions why rescue took 3 days when the crash location was known. Nobody examines the students for psychological damage from living through Lord of the Flies conditions. The school successfully conducted a human experiment on children and covered it up as a field trip gone wrong. Otto keeps his job specifically because he successfully executed the mission. Springfield Elementary didn't fire him for gross negligence resulting in students stranding on an island. They kept him employed because he delivered the subjects to the test location and evacuated without compromising the experiment. His continued employment is payment for participation in child experimentation. Every time Otto drives students anywhere, there's a possibility he's delivering them to another observation scenario. This wasn't Springfield Elementary's first or last behavioral experiment. Throughout the series, students face suspiciously convenient scenarios that test specific psychological responses. They're exposed to radioactive materials to study mutation effects. They're given standardized tests designed to induce anxiety rather than measure knowledge. They're placed in competitive scenarios that generate interpersonal conflict for observation. The school has been using students as experimental subjects for years, and Das Bus is just the most obviously orchestrated example. The students never discuss the island experience afterward. No trauma, no bonding over shared survival, no references to the time they lived through Lord of the Flies for real. That collective amnesia suggests either psychological intervention to suppress memories or recognition that discussing the experience would expose the school's experiment. The students know something wrong happened, and they've been conditioned not to talk about it. That's the final proof this wasn't an accident. Accidents get discussed. Deliberate experiments get silenced. Let's carry on with the next conspiracy. In episode Homer the Heretic, Homer decides to skip church and spend Sundays at home, leading to the best day of his life. That night, God appears in his dream and explicitly tells Homer it's okay to skip church and worship in his own way. The next Sunday, Homer's house catches fire, and multiple religious figures of different faiths save him, proving all religions work together to protect Homer. What seems like a light-hearted episode about religious tolerance is actually God confirming on camera that Homer Simpson operates under divine protection, explaining every impossible survival and reality warping moment in the series. God's appearance isn't ambiguous or symbolic. God physically manifests in Homer's dream as a distinct entity with a visible form and audible voice. This isn't Homer's subconscious creating comforting rationalizations. This is God choosing to visit Homer personally to approve his decision to skip organized religion. When characters in The Simpsons meet God, it's treated as literal contact with the divine being who controls reality. God doesn't appear to most people. God appeared to Homer specifically to tell him that standard rules don't apply. The conversation reveals God's attitude toward Homer. God isn't angry about the church skipping. God finds it reasonable. God tells Homer that organized religion isn't necessary for someone who maintains faith in their own way. This is divine permission to ignore human religious structures. God is saying that Homer has direct access to divine favor without requiring institutional mediation. That's not how religion normally works. Most faiths require adherence to specific practices, attendance at worship services, and participation in community rituals. God is explicitly exempting Homer from these requirements. Homer asks God why he should worship at all if God's okay with him skipping church. God could reinforce religious obligation at this moment. Instead, God essentially tells Homer to do what feels right. God is prioritizing Homer's comfort and happiness over traditional worship requirements. This reveals God's relationship with Homer specifically. God wants Homer happy. God is willing to bend religious rules to ensure Homer's happiness. That's favoritism. That's divine protection extending to spiritual requirements. The house fire tests God's protection immediately. Homer wakes up from the dream and goes about his Sunday morning. He falls asleep smoking a cigar, which ignites a fire that spreads through his house. This should kill Homer and his family. House fires have high fatality rates, especially fires that start while occupants are sleeping. Homer wakes up surrounded by flames with no clear escape route. His family is trapped upstairs. This is a situation with negligible survival probability. Then the rescue begins. Ned Flanders arrives first and breaks down the door. Ned is Homer's evangelical Christian neighbor who's been begging Homer to return to church. Despite Homer rejecting everything Ned represents spiritually, Ned runs into a burning building to save him. That's Christian charity in action, proving Christianity protects Homer, regardless of Homer's rejection of church attendance. Ned gets Homer and part of the family out while the fire continues spreading. Krusty the Clown arrives next. Krusty is Jewish. He's not personally close with Homer. He has no obligation to risk his life for the Simpson family. Yet Krusty runs into the burning house to help with rescue operations. Judaism protects Homer. A Jewish entertainer who barely knows Homer will enter lethal danger to save him because something compels Krusty to participate in Homer's protection. Reverend Lovejoy arrives and contributes to the rescue efforts. Reverend Lovejoy represents mainstream Protestant Christianity. He's been frustrated with Homer's lack of commitment to the church throughout the episode. Despite this frustration, Lovejoy puts aside his disappointment and helps save Homer's family. Protestant Christianity protects Homer even when Homer disappoints Protestant leadership. Apu arrives and participates in the rescue. Apu is Hindu. He runs the Quick E-Mart where Homer shops frequently, but they're not close friends. Apu has no special obligation to risk death for the Simpson family. Yet Hinduism compels Apu to help. Hindu spirituality protects Homer. The episode is explicitly showing that multiple religious traditions all contribute to Homer's survival. The firefighters eventually extinguish the blaze. Homer's house suffers significant damage but remains structurally intact. The family survives without serious injuries despite being trapped in a fully engulfed building. The odds of everyone surviving are astronomically low. Yet they all survived because representatives from multiple faith traditions coordinated to ensure Homer's protection. This wasn't luck. This was organized divine intervention deploying multiple religious systems in concert. Reverend Lovejoy delivers a sermon about the rescue. He explains that God was working through all of them regardless of religious affiliation. He acknowledges that multiple faiths collaborated to save Homer. This is the admission. Springfield's religious leaders recognize that something supernatural maintains Homer's survival. They witnessed it firsthand. They participated in it. They know Homer is protected by forces beyond normal human capability. The sermon confirms that Homer's divine protection is known and accepted by religious authorities. Homer's response to nearly dying reveals his protected status. He doesn't learn caution. He doesn't become more religious. He immediately returns to his previous behavior. He goes back to skipping church, eating excessively, working carelessly, and engaging in all the activities that should have killed him during the fire. He learned nothing because he doesn't need to learn. God already told him he's fine. The multi-faith rescue proved God was right. Homer can continue living recklessly because divine protection will deploy whatever religious system is necessary to ensure his survival. Throughout the series, Homer survives scenarios that should be fatal. He works in a nuclear power plant with constant radiation exposure. He gets strangled by Bart regularly without brain damage. He falls from significant heights and pops back into shape. He's been shot, stabbed, crushed, drowned, and electrocuted multiple times. Every single time, he survives. The Homer the Heretic episode explains why. God personally decided Homer gets divine protection, and God deployed every available religious tradition to prove it works. This explains Frank Grimes' death. Grimes challenged Homer's protected status. Grimes tried to prove Homer's survival was unfair and unjustified. Grimes attempted to replicate Homer's behavior to show that Homer's protection was environmental rather than personal. When Grimes touched the same electrical equipment Homer touches safely, Grimes died instantly. God's protection of Homer doesn't extend to people who challenge Homer's protected status. The universe itself eliminates threats to Homer's divine favoritism. The implications wreck every religion in Springfield. God has confirmed that Homer Simpson receives special treatment. God visited Homer personally, exempted him from religious obligations, and deployed multiple faith traditions to demonstrate Homer's protection. Every religious leader in Springfield knows this. They've seen the evidence. They participated in the rescue. They know that challenging Homer's status means challenging God's explicit decision to favor Homer. Nobody in Springfield can claim ignorance about Homer's divine protection. They've all witnessed it. God didn't just approve Homer's church skipping. God confirmed that Homer exists under different spiritual rules than everyone else. That's why Homer can survive impossible situations. That's why reality bends around Homer. That's why Frank Grimes died while Homer thrived. God chose Homer as a favored subject, told Homer directly, and proved it through multi-faith coordinated rescue. Homer's not lucky. He's divinely mandated to survive, and God made sure everyone in Springfield knows it. Now let's move on to the next conspiracy. In episode Lisa's Substitute, Mr. Bergstrom arrives as a substitute teacher who recognizes Lisa's intelligence and gives her the attention she craves. They bond over intellectual pursuits, Jewish culture, and feeling misunderstood. When he leaves, Lisa chases him to the train station where he gives her a note saying, "You are Lisa Simpson," then boards the train and disappears forever. What seems like a touching story about a mentor inspiring a student is actually documenting a grooming operation where an adult man deliberately formed an inappropriate emotional attachment with an 8-year-old girl, made himself essential to her emotional well-being, then abandoned her to create lasting attachment trauma. Mr. Bergstrom's first appearance in Lisa's classroom shows immediate identification of his target. He walks in, surveys the students, and within minutes he's identified Lisa as the intelligent, neglected child who needs validation. He doesn't discover this gradually through teaching. He knows immediately. That recognition speed suggests either previous research on the student body or professional training in identifying vulnerable children. Teachers who randomly substitute don't usually pinpoint specific students for special attention within their first hour. Bergstrom does. The bonding accelerates unnaturally fast. Within a single class period, Bergstrom and Lisa have established an intellectual rapport that most teacher-student relationships take months to develop. He's asking about her interests, sharing his own interests, creating inside jokes, and positioning himself as the only adult who truly understands her. Lisa responds by becoming emotionally dependent almost immediately. She goes from normal student to desperate for Bergstrom's approval within hours. That accelerated attachment isn't organic. That's deliberate cultivation of dependency by someone who knows how to create it quickly. Bergstrom uses Lisa's Jewish curiosity as a bonding mechanism. Lisa has been exploring Jewish culture and identity despite her family being non-religious. Bergstrom, who is Jewish, immediately offers to share his cultural knowledge with her. He makes their Jewishness a special connection that excludes other students and even Lisa's own family. This creates intimacy through shared identity that Lisa can't access anywhere else. Bergstrom is deliberately making himself the sole provider of something Lisa wants but can't get from her parents. That's isolation strategy. Make the child dependent on you for needs their family won't meet. The private conversations escalate beyond educational boundaries. Bergstrom talks to Lisa during recess, before school, after school. These conversations happen away from other students and without other adult supervision. They discuss personal topics, emotional needs, family disappointments. Bergstrom learns that Lisa feels intellectually ignored by Homer, who prioritizes Bart's sports over Lisa's academic achievements. Bergstrom positions himself as the father figure who values Lisa's intellect the way Homer should but doesn't. He's explicitly replacing parental validation with his own attention. The train station goodbye reveals how thoroughly Bergstrom has embedded himself in Lisa's emotional structure. When Lisa learns Bergstrom is leaving, she experiences complete emotional devastation. She cuts school, runs across town, chases his train on foot while crying and screaming for him not to leave. This is not normal student-teacher attachment. This is traumatic abandonment response from a child who has made an adult man the center of her emotional well-being in less than 2 weeks. Bergstrom created that dependency knowingly and is now severing it permanently. The note is the manipulation's culmination. You are Lisa Simpson. 3 words that define Lisa's identity through Bergstrom's validation. He's telling Lisa that her identity is confirmed by his acknowledgement, that her worth exists because he recognized it, that she is who she is because he told her so. This plants Bergstrom permanently in Lisa's self-concept. Every time Lisa thinks about who she is, she'll remember that Bergstrom told her. He's ensured permanent psychological presence through identity validation that makes him impossible to forget. Then he gets on the train and disappears forever. No contact information, no forwarding address, no way for Lisa to reach him ever again. He created intense emotional dependency, validated her identity through his attention, then made himself completely inaccessible. This is abandonment trauma. Lisa learned that male authority figures who understand her will inevitably leave, that the validation she craves is temporary, that she cannot trust male mentors to remain present. Bergstrom taught all of these lessons deliberately through his departure. Lisa's behavior throughout the rest of the series confirms lasting damage. She repeatedly seeks validation from male authority figures. She forms inappropriate attachments to adult men who show her intellectual respect. She has abandonment, anxiety about people leaving her life. She demonstrates trust issues with authority figures who might disappoint her. Every single one of these patterns traces back to Bergstrom, creating and then severing their relationship. He left her with permanent psychological damage disguised as inspirational teaching. The episode frames this as touching and bittersweet. The music swells as Bergstrom's train departs. Lisa's tears are presented as sad, but ultimately healthy. The note is treated as a beautiful gift that Lisa treasures. But examine what actually happened. An adult man identified a vulnerable child, isolated her emotionally, created intense psychological dependency, explicitly positioned himself as a replacement father figure, then abandoned her permanently with only a cryptic note about her identity. That's not mentorship, that's textbook grooming behavior. Bergstrom targeted Lisa specifically. He didn't give equal attention to all students. He didn't maintain professional boundaries. He didn't coordinate his mentorship with Lisa's parents. He created a private emotional relationship with an 8-year-old girl that excluded parental oversight and peer involvement. He made himself essential to Lisa's emotional regulation, then removed himself completely, and the school, apparently, had no policies preventing substitute teachers from forming intense personal relationships with students and disappearing without follow-up. Where did Bergstrom go? He never appears in Springfield again. He never contacts Lisa. He never checks on how she's processing his departure. He completely vanishes from her life despite knowing he'd become central to her emotional well-being. That disappearance pattern is consistent with someone who deliberately creates attachment and abandonment cycles with vulnerable children, then moves to new locations to repeat the pattern. Substitute teaching provides perfect cover for this behavior. Short-term assignments, no long-term accountability, access to hundreds of potential targets across multiple schools. The note itself is manipulative. You are Lisa Simpson. It's profound enough to seem meaningful but vague enough to require Lisa's own interpretation. Lisa can project whatever meaning she needs onto those 3 words, ensuring they remain significant regardless of context. Bergstrom didn't give her concrete guidance or useful wisdom. He gave her an identity validation that sounds deep but provides nothing practical. That ambiguity keeps Lisa emotionally attached because she's constantly trying to understand what Bergstrom meant. He ensured she'd think about him forever through deliberate vagueness. Springfield Elementary let this happen. Principal Skinner hired Bergstrom without apparently vetting his history of interactions with students. No teacher or administrator noticed Bergstrom forming an intense personal relationship with Lisa Simpson. No one questioned why a substitute was spending private time with a student discussing personal and cultural matters. No exit interview occurred where someone might have flagged the inappropriate attachment. The school facilitated grooming through institutional negligence and then let the groomer disappear without consequence. Lisa was 8 years old. 8. An adult man made an 8-year-old girl emotionally dependent on him within days, made himself her primary source of validation, then vanished. The show treats this as a beautiful story about an inspiring teacher. It's actually documenting an adult man teaching a child that male authorities who value her will always abandon her, and that her identity depends on validation from men who won't stay. That's not inspiration. That's psychological damage with a soundtrack. Bergstrom is still out there, still substitute teaching, still identifying vulnerable, intelligent, neglected children who need validation, still creating intense emotional bonds, still abandoning them with cryptic notes that ensure permanent psychological presence. And Springfield Elementary will hire the next man just like him because no one recognized what happened to Lisa as abuse. They thought it was mentorship. That's how grooming works. Everyone thinks the predator was being kind right up until they notice the damage. Let's slide into the next conspiracy. In the Treehouse of Horror V segment, Time and Punishment, Homer accidentally creates a time machine from a toaster, travels to the dinosaur age, and changes history by stepping on a bug. Each time he returns to the present, reality has been altered. Flanders rules the world, donuts don't exist, everyone has lizard tongues. After multiple attempts, Homer gives up and accepts a reality where his family eats with their tongues in an unsettling way. What seems like a silly time travel parody is actually proof that Homer Simpson can rewrite fundamental reality, and his family retains memories across timelines, meaning they're consciously aware of his reality warping abilities and choose to stay with him despite the danger. Homer creates a time machine by accidentally jamming the toaster's settings while trying to fix it. The toaster transforms into a temporal displacement device instantly. Homer doesn't build it intentionally. He doesn't understand the science. His simple act of hitting the toaster wrong creates technology that can rewrite causality. That's not mechanical failure. That's Homer's touch altering the fundamental properties of objects. A normal toaster breaking wouldn't become a portal to other timelines. Homer's interaction with the toaster made it into something that defies physics. The first trip proves Homer's capability immediately. He materializes in the Cretaceous period and immediately panics about contaminating the timeline. He sits down carefully, trying not to touch anything. A mosquito lands on his hand. He swats it. That single action changes everything. When Homer returns to the present, Ned Flanders rules the world in a totalitarian dictatorship where everyone must be nice or face re-education. Homer destroyed and rebuilt reality by killing one insect 65 million years ago. That butterfly effect is extreme even for chaos theory. The universe is so responsive to Homer's actions that a single mosquito death rewrites human civilization. Homer immediately jumps back to fix it. He doesn't question whether he should have this power. He doesn't consider the ethical implications. He just keeps trying until he gets a timeline he likes. This reveals Homer's attitude toward reality manipulation. He treats existence like a video game where he can reload saves until he gets the outcome he wants. The fact that he can actually do this proves reality is subordinate to Homer's desires. Normal people who accidentally change history would be stuck with consequences. Homer gets infinite attempts. Each timeline Homer creates is permanent until he destroys it. When Homer returns to the Flanders dictatorship, that reality has history, infrastructure, and established social systems. Flanders didn't just suddenly start ruling. There's a whole timeline where Flanders' dictatorship developed over years. Homer, creating that timeline, means all those events actually happened to real people in that version of reality. Then Homer obliterates that entire timeline by going back and trying again. Everyone in the Flanders universe just ceased to exist because Homer didn't like it. The donut-free timeline shows Homer's priorities. He returns to present-day Springfield, where everything seems normal, except donuts have never been invented. Homer asks what a donut is, and everyone looks confused. This minor change shouldn't even register as a problem. But Homer immediately rejects this timeline because his favorite food doesn't exist. He's willing to destroy an entire universe where everyone he loves exists and thrives simply because he wants donuts. That's the decision-making process of someone who treats reality as disposable. Homer's family recognizes the timeline changes. When Homer returns from each trip, Marge and the kids notice something's wrong. They don't remember the alternate timelines, but they perceive that Homer has changed something. Marge asks what's wrong with Homer. The kids notice he's acting strangely. They're detecting timeline alterations, even though they shouldn't have any frame of reference for what changed. That detection ability suggests they exist across multiple timelines simultaneously, and their consciousness registers disruptions even when their memories don't. The lizard tongue timeline makes this explicit. Homer returns to a reality where everyone's tongue is a long, gross lizard tongue that extends from their mouths when they eat. Homer is horrified. His family notices his horror and asks what's wrong. Homer says this timeline is weird. Marge responds that he's the one being weird. They're defending the lizard tongue reality as normal because that's their current existence, but Homer's revulsion triggers their memory. They suddenly realize they're in a wrong timeline. They don't remember the correct timeline, but they know this one is incorrect. Homer decides to try again. He goes back multiple more times. Each attempt creates new horrors. The family gets increasingly disturbed by the timeline shifts. Eventually, Homer returns to another lizard tongue timeline, very similar to the previous one. He's exhausted from trying to fix things. Marge asks if everything's okay. Homer looks at his family, eating with their horrifying lizard tongues, pauses, then says close enough and sits down to eat. He's accepted a fundamentally wrong reality because fixing it is too much work. That acceptance reveals the extent of Homer's power and his casual attitude toward it. He can rewrite reality infinitely. He's done it multiple times in one episode. He's obliterated universes, killed billions of people across timelines, and reshaped causality based on personal preference. And when he gets tired, he just picks a timeline that's sort of okay and decides to live in it. He's not trapped in the lizard tongue universe. He could keep trying. He just doesn't care enough anymore. That's a reality warping God deciding that a wrong universe is good enough. The family goes along with his decision. They eat their meals with lizard tongues like it's normal because Homer decided this is their reality now. They've lost agency over their own existence. Homer determines what universe they live in, and they adapt. That's the relationship dynamic. Homer has God powers, uses them carelessly, and his family just accepts whatever reality he creates because they have no alternative. They can't escape Homer's timeline manipulation. They exist wherever Homer decides they exist. This explains every Treehouse of Horror episode. They're not non-canon fantasies, they're documented instances of Homer accidentally or deliberately rewriting reality into horror scenarios. The zombie apocalypse episode, Homer created that timeline. The alien invasion episode, Homer's timeline manipulation allowed it. The dimensional portal episodes, Homer's opening those portals. Every single Treehouse of Horror happens because Homer's reality warping powers destabilize existence annually, usually around Halloween for some reason. The family's awareness proves they remember across timelines at some level. They reference previous Treehouse episodes in later ones. They make jokes about dying in previous Halloween specials. They demonstrate knowledge of events that happened in timelines Homer destroyed. That persistent memory means they're conscious of Homer's reality manipulation even when they can't articulate it. They know Homer can rewrite existence. They know they've died multiple times. They know Halloween brings reality breakdowns. And they accept it because challenging Homer means he might rewrite them out of existence entirely. Homer's casual reality, destruction in time and punishment connects to his protected status throughout the series. Frank Grimes died challenging Homer because Homer's protection extends to timeline manipulation. God personally approved Homer's existence in Homer the Heretic. That divine approval includes permission to rewrite timelines. Homer has been given authority over reality itself by forces beyond human comprehension. When Homer touches a toaster and it becomes a time machine, that's not accident. That's Homer's fundamental nature manifesting through objects. The implications destroy any sense of stable reality in The Simpsons. If Homer can rewrite timelines by stepping on bugs, then the current Simpsons timeline exists only because Homer hasn't decided to change it yet. Everything happening in Springfield could be obliterated if Homer has a bad day and decides to try again. The family, the town, the entire universe exists at Homer's pleasure. He's maintaining current reality through inaction, not because it's the correct timeline, but because he got tired of trying to improve it. The lizard tongue ending confirms this horror. Homer looked at a fundamentally broken reality and said, "It's close enough." That's the universe everyone in The Simpsons inhabits. A reality where Homer decided close enough after destroying countless other attempts. They're not in the best timeline. They're not even in a correct timeline. They're in whichever timeline Homer settled for when he got bored of God-level reality manipulation. And they eat with lizard tongues because Homer gave up. All right, time for the next conspiracy. In episode, the Great Louse detective, Frank Grimes Jr., appears in prison and immediately tries to murder Homer Simpson, explaining that his father's death was Homer's fault. Despite being hired to catch a different killer, Grimes Jr. brings a bomb specifically to kill Homer, continuing his father's mission to expose and eliminate the reality warping anomaly. What seems like a one-off revenge plot is actually proof that the Grimes family has been studying Homer's abilities and coordinating attacks across multiple generations to eliminate the protected threat he represents. Frank Grimes Jr. introduces himself in prison with full knowledge of his father's story. He doesn't need anyone to explain what happened. He's been researching. He knows Homer Simpson exists under protected reality status. He knows his father died trying to expose that protection, and he's dedicated his life to finishing his father's work. That dedication suggests the Grimes family has turned anti-Homer activism into a generational mission. Senior dies, Junior continues. This is a family vendetta against an existential threat. The prison scene reveals how Grimes Jr. has been preparing. He's serving time for unspecified crimes, but his immediate focus when Homer's name comes up is revenge. He doesn't need motivation. He doesn't need convincing. He already has complete understanding of why Homer must be eliminated. Someone taught him about Homer's anomalous status. Someone explained that Frank Grimes Sr. identified the truth and paid with his life. Someone raised Grimes Jr. specifically to continue the mission. That's multi-generational warfare against a reality-warping enemy. Grimes Jr. accepts release specifically to get close to Homer. He's theoretically helping catch a different killer, but his actual goal is assassination. He brings a bomb. Not a gun, not a knife. A bomb. That choice reveals strategic thinking. Bombs don't require direct contact. Bombs can't be dodged through cartoon physics. Bombs kill everyone in the blast radius, regardless of individual protection. Grimes Jr. studied how his father died and learned from the mistake. Don't try to prove Homer's incompetence. Don't rely on others to see the truth. Just eliminate the threat with overwhelming force. Sideshow Bob's involvement adds another layer. Bob is also trying to kill a Simpson, specifically Bart. When Grimes Jr. and Sideshow Bob meet, there's mutual recognition. Both are pursuing Simpson family elimination. Both have tried multiple times. Both have failed repeatedly despite careful planning. They're not collaborating, but they recognize each other as fellow victims of Simpson family plot armor. Bob's repeated failures prove that the protection extends to Homer's entire family. Bart survives Bob's attempts just like Homer survives everything. The Simpsons are collectively protected. The bomb plan nearly succeeds. Grimes Jr. gets the device close to Homer. He sets the timer. He has Homer isolated. Everything is positioned for successful assassination. Then the bomb fails. Not because of diffusing, not because Homer discovered it. It just fails. The universe prevented the bomb from killing Homer through inexplicable mechanical failure. Grimes Jr. built a functional explosive device that stopped functioning specifically when Homer was the target. That's the reality protection in action. Technology fails when directed at Homer. Grimes Jr. faces consequences while Homer walks away unharmed. The assassination attempt results in Grimes Jr. returning to prison. Homer suffers nothing, no investigation into why someone tried to bomb him, no protection services, no legal proceedings against Grimes Jr. for attempted murder. The system just removes the threat and moves on. Homer continues existing in protected status while anyone who challenges that protection gets eliminated from his life through imprisonment or death. The Grimes family knows the truth about Homer, and that knowledge has destroyed them. Frank Grimes Sr. worked his entire life for basic stability, encountered Homer's reality-warping protection, tried to expose it, and died instantly. Frank Grimes Jr. inherited his father's knowledge, dedicated his life to revenge, carefully planned assassination, and failed because reality itself prevented the bomb from working. 2 generations of Grimes family members have sacrificed everything trying to stop Homer Simpson, and both failed because challenging Homer means challenging forces beyond human capability. Where is the rest of the Grimes family? Frank Sr. had a son, which means there was a mother. There might be siblings. There might be extended family who heard Frank Sr.'s stories before he died. Are they all studying Homer? Are they all planning their own attempts? The Grimes family vendetta might extend to dozens of people across multiple generations, all trying different methods to eliminate the Homer Simpson anomaly. Junior's failure won't be the end. Someone else in the Grimes family will try next. Springfield has forgotten Frank Grimes Sr. exists. His grave sits unvisited. His name is never mentioned except when Junior appears. The town collectively memory hold the man who died, proving Homer's invincibility, because remembering him means acknowledging what he discovered. Homer breaks reality. Anyone who challenges that dies or gets imprisoned. The safest response is forgetting Grimes ever existed and accepting Homer's protected status. Springfield chose amnesia over truth, but the Grimes family can't forget. They lost Frank Sr. to Homer's reality bubble. They watched Junior fail and return to prison. They know that Springfield has an anomaly walking around causing catastrophic damage while facing zero consequences. And they can't do anything about it because the universe itself protects Homer from elimination. The Grimes family has become trapped in an impossible mission. They know Homer must be stopped, but stopping him is literally impossible. Reality won't allow it. The episode treats this as a one-time revenge plot that fails and ends, but Grimes Jr. is still in prison. He's still alive. He's still committed to killing Homer. He'll eventually get released again. He'll try again. And he'll fail again, because Homer's protection is permanent. The Grimes family war against Homer will continue across generations until either every Grimes family member gives up or dies trying. There's no victory condition. There's no scenario where the Grimes family succeeds in eliminating Homer because Homer cannot be eliminated. That's the horror. The Grimes family is right. Homer Simpson is a dangerous anomaly who breaks reality and faces no consequences. Frank Grimes Sr. correctly identified this threat and died trying to expose it. Frank Grimes Jr. correctly identified Homer as his father's killer and failed to achieve justice. Future Grimes family members will correctly identify the same threat and also fail. Being right doesn't matter when you're fighting someone who reality itself has decided to protect. The Grimes family is trapped in eternal futile revenge against an unkillable target. Homer continues existing, completely unaware that a family has dedicated multiple generations to his elimination. He doesn't know about Junior's bomb. He doesn't remember Senior's death was his fault. He faces no consequences for destroying the Grimes family across decades. The protection is so complete that Homer doesn't even know people are trying to kill him, specifically because of his protected status. He just lives his life, while the Grimes family destroys itself trying to stop him. Let's keep it pushing to the next conspiracy. In episode The City of New York vs. Homer Simpson, Homer travels to New York to retrieve his car from between the World Trade Center towers. At one point, a magazine cover shows the number 9 next to the towers, creating the image 9/11. The episode aired in 1997, 4 years before September 11, 2001. What seems like a coincidental visual is actually the writers embedding a prediction of the attacks, using the Simpsons' established track record of predicting the future to warn about the coming tragedy. The image is undeniable. Lisa holds up a magazine showing a bus route priced at $9. The 9 is positioned directly next to the Twin Towers in the background. Together they form 9/11. This isn't subtle. This isn't accidental framing. The magazine had to be designed specifically with that number, and the shot had to be composed specifically to place the towers adjacent. Multiple people made deliberate choices to create this image. Writers wrote the scene, artists drew the magazine, animators positioned the elements, directors approved the composition. That's coordinated effort to produce a specific visual result. The air date confirms impossible foreknowledge. The City of New York vs. Homer Simpson premiered September 20, 1997. The September 11th attacks happened September 11th, 2001. That's 4 years and 10 days between prediction and event. Not decades. Not vague future prediction. 4 years. Close enough that whoever created this image likely knew specific timeline information. Far enough out that the prediction seems impossible without inside knowledge of planning phases. The Simpsons' prediction track record makes this pattern undeniable. The show predicted Donald Trump's presidency in the Bart to the Future episode. From 2000, 16 years before it happened. The show predicted smartwatches in the Lisa's Wedding episode from 1995, before the technology existed. The show predicted Disney buying 20th Century Fox in the When You Dish Upon a Star episode from 1998, 17 years before the acquisition. The show predicted FaceTime video calling, autocorrect errors, hamburger emoji, three-eyed fish appearing near nuclear plants, and dozens of other specific future events that later manifested exactly as depicted. That track record isn't luck. Luck doesn't predict specific future events repeatedly across decades. Luck doesn't show Donald Trump descending an escalator years before he actually does it during his campaign announcement. Luck doesn't predict specific corporate acquisitions years before they're publicly discussed. The Simpsons writers have demonstrated consistent foreknowledge of future events that should be impossible to know. They're either extremely sophisticated at trend prediction or they have access to information about planned futures. The 9/11 prediction fits this pattern perfectly. Specific visual composition, exact date reference, years before the event, no ambiguity about what's being shown. The image says 9/11 next to the World Trade Center towers. 4 years later, the World Trade Center towers were destroyed on 9/11. That connection is direct. No interpretation required. No vague symbolism. The show displayed the exact date of an attack on the exact location years before it happened. Why embed this warning in a comedy show? Because overtly, Warning about terrorist attacks would require explaining how you know. Intelligence agencies would investigate the source. The writers would face scrutiny about their knowledge. Embedding the warning in fiction provides plausible deniability. It's just a cartoon. It's just a coincidence. Nobody takes predictions seriously when they come from animated comedies. The warning can exist in public view without triggering investigation because the medium makes it dismissible. The episode was pulled from syndication after September 11th. Networks stopped airing The City of New York versus Homer Simpson for years because the World Trade Center featured prominently throughout. The official reason was sensitivity about showing the destroyed towers, but pulling the episode also ensured the 9/11 image wouldn't circulate widely. Fewer people would see the prediction. Fewer people would make the connection. The image existed, aired once in prime time to millions of viewers, then got memory hold through syndication removal. Other warnings might exist in the same episode. The entire plot involves Homer's car getting trapped between the twin towers, requiring him to navigate bureaucratic systems to retrieve it. That's symbolic. Something was trapped in the tower's infrastructure, requiring navigation of complex systems to address. The episode treats New York as hostile and unwelcoming to outsiders. Homer suffers multiple problems throughout the city before finally escaping. The episode's overall tone toward New York and the towers specifically is dark, which is unusual for The Simpsons' treatment of cities. The writer's background supports foreknowledge capability. Many Simpsons writers have advanced degrees, connections to academic institutions, and relationships with people in government and intelligence fields. They're not isolated comedy writers. They're educated, connected individuals with access to information networks that regular people don't have. If plans for September 11th existed in intelligence circles years before the attacks, Simpsons writers are exactly the kind of people who might hear about those plans through informal channels. The prediction served its purpose regardless of whether anyone noticed. The warning existed in public record. Millions saw it when the episode aired in 1997. Anyone studying The Simpsons carefully could have caught the reference. But nobody understood it as a warning until after the attacks happened. That's how embedded predictions work. They're visible in hindsight, useless for prevention. The writers documented their foreknowledge without preventing anything because warnings in cartoon form don't trigger preventative action. The Simpsons continues predicting the future in later episodes. The pattern hasn't stopped. The show accurately predicted smartwatches, video calling, Disney acquisitions, election results, technology developments, and cultural trends years before they happened. That consistent accuracy proves access to planning documents, trend analysis beyond public capability, or actual foreknowledge from sources who know future events before they occur. The 9/11 prediction is the most disturbing example because it involves mass casualty terrorism, but it's not an isolated incident. It's part of decades-long pattern of The Simpsons displaying impossible future knowledge. Someone on The Simpsons writing staff knew about September 11th in 1997. They created a visual reference showing 9/11 next to the World Trade Center towers. They embedded it in an episode about Homer visiting New York. The episode aired 4 years before the attacks. Then it got pulled from circulation after the attacks happened, ensuring the prediction wouldn't receive widespread attention. The warning existed, millions saw it, nobody understood until too late. And The Simpsons just kept predicting the future because apparently that's what they do. Now we're rolling into the next conspiracy. In episode Marge versus the Monorail, smooth-talking Lyle Lanley convinces Springfield to spend their budget surplus on a monorail. Despite warnings from Marge, the town builds the faulty system. During the maiden voyage, the monorail accelerates out of control, nearly killing everyone before Homer manages to stop it by creating an anchor. After the disaster, Leonard Nimoy mentions that Lanley had previously sold a monorail to Brockway, Ogdenville, and North Haverbrook, all of which failed catastrophically. What seems like a story about a con artist selling faulty products is actually exposing Lyle Lanley as a serial killer who deliberately engineers transit disasters across multiple towns, causing mass casualties for profit while avoiding prosecution through legal loopholes. Lanley's sales pitch reveals sophisticated manipulation tactics. He arrives in Springfield with a complete presentation, musical number, and crowd control strategy. The song Monorail gets the entire town singing along within minutes. He's using call and response techniques, repetitive lyrics, and crowd enthusiasm to override rational objections. When Marge tries to ask questions, the crowd shouts her down because they're already hypnotized by Lanley's performance. This isn't salesmanship, this is psychological warfare designed to prevent critical thinking. The song itself contains red flags that nobody catches. Lanley repeatedly deflects legitimate concerns with meaningless rhymes. When someone asks about cost, he rhymes it with something completely unrelated. When safety questions arise, he pivots to excitement about speed. He's not answering questions. He's using musical distraction to prevent questions from being asked seriously. The entire town accepts his pitch not because it makes sense, but because they're caught up in group enthusiasm that Lanley deliberately manufactured. Lanley's previous victims provide the pattern. A resident from North Haverbrook appears at the town meeting specifically to warn Springfield. He explains that Lanley sold them a monorail that failed, destroyed their town, and left them in economic ruin. He's traveled to Springfield specifically to prevent another disaster. Lanley's response is to mock the man's appearance and credentials, turning the crowd against him through ad hominem attacks. The warning gets dismissed not because it's false, but because Lanley successfully made the messenger seem unreliable. The man leaves defeated while Springfield proceeds with construction. That warning proves Lanley knows his monorails fail. He's been through this process before. He sold North Haverbrook a faulty system, watched it fail, collected his money, and left. Then he sold Ogdenville a faulty system. Then Brockway. Now Springfield. He's not accidentally making defective products. He's deliberately selling systems designed to fail after he's safely departed. That's serial, mass negligent homicide with established pattern and planning. The construction reveals intentional engineering failures. The monorail gets built incredibly fast using cheap materials. Lanley hires local workers with no transit construction experience. There's no safety inspection, no engineering review, no regulatory oversight. The entire system gets assembled in weeks when proper transit infrastructure takes years. That rushed construction with unskilled labor using substandard materials guarantees catastrophic failure. Lanley designed the process to maximize failure probability. The maiden voyage makes Lanley's intention clear. He's scheduled to leave on a plane the same day as the monorail's first passenger run. He'll be thousands of miles away when the inevitable disaster occurs. That timing isn't coincidence. He's planned his escape for exactly when the system will fail, ensuring he's beyond legal jurisdiction when bodies start counting. He's done this before in North Haverbrook, Ogdenville, and Brockway. Arrive, sell, build, escape before the crash. The monorail accelerates out of control immediately after departure. Homer's driving despite having zero training or qualifications. The control panel is labeled in confusing ways. The brakes don't work. The emergency stop doesn't exist. Every safety system that should prevent accidents is either missing or non-functional. This isn't bad engineering. This is deliberate removal of safety features to ensure maximum casualties during inevitable failure. Lanley built a death trap and sold it as transportation. Homer manages to stop the monorail through improvised anchoring, but this survival is luck. The system was designed to crash and kill everyone aboard. Homer's cartoon, physics, and reality warping protection allowed him to survive what should have been mass casualty incident. In North Haverbrook, Ogdenville, and Brockway, passengers didn't have Homer's protection. Those monorails crashed and killed people. Lanley has body counts across multiple towns. Leonard Nimoy's comments confirm multiple victims. He casually mentions that Lanley sold monorails to several towns, and they all failed. This is public knowledge among people who pay attention to infrastructure disasters. Yet Lanley continues operating freely. He's not in prison. He's not facing criminal charges. He's traveling to new towns and selling new death traps. That continued operation proves either legal immunity through corporate structure or law enforcement's complete failure to prosecute mass negligent homicide. Lanley's final scene shows him escaping to Tahiti with a suitcase full of money. He's on a plane out of the country, smoking a cigar, counting cash while Springfield's monorail crashes behind him. He's successfully repeated his serial killing operation and escaped prosecution again. Then the plane lands in North Haverbrook. The previous victims find him. They beat him up. That's the only justice Lanley faces. Mob violence from survivors. Not arrest, not trial, not prison. Just getting beaten by people whose lives he destroyed. He survives the beating and presumably escapes again because he appears later in other episodes. The consequences for killing people across multiple towns through deliberately faulty infrastructure are temporary physical assault. He keeps his money. He keeps his freedom. He presumably continues selling faulty systems to new towns because his method works. Arrive, sell with musical distraction, build deadly system, escape before crash, face no legal consequences. The body count across Lanley's operations is never specified, but must be significant. Each monorail carried dozens of passengers. Each crash likely killed some percentage of those passengers. North Haverbrook, Ogdenville, Brockway, and nearly Springfield. That's at least 4 major transit disasters. If each crash killed even 10 people, that's 40 deaths minimum. Lanley is a mass murderer who's killed dozens through systematic infrastructure sabotage for profit. Springfield's continued operation of the monorail after the crash makes no sense unless they repaired the system. But if they repaired it, they discovered all of Lanley's deliberate safety violations and engineering flaws. They found the missing brakes, the non-functional emergency systems, the substandard materials. That discovery should have triggered criminal investigation, federal transit, oversight involvement, and charges against Lanley. None of this happened. Springfield just quietly stopped using the monorail and moved on. The pattern explains why Lanley targets small towns. They don't have sophisticated regulatory systems. They don't have experienced transit engineers who would catch his fraud during planning phases. They don't have resources to pursue international prosecution after he flees. Small towns are vulnerable to this kind of serial infrastructure fraud because they lack institutional capacity to prevent or prosecute it. Lanley has identified this vulnerability and exploited it repeatedly across multiple locations. Lanley is still out there. He has money. He has a proven method. He has a list of vulnerable towns. He's refining his sales pitch and musical manipulation techniques. Somewhere right now he's probably arriving in a new small town that just came into unexpected money. He's probably performing a new version of the monorail song for a new crowd of victims, and he'll successfully sell them a death trap, build it fast, and escape before it crashes. Because that's what Lanley does. He's a serial infrastructure killer who monetizes mass casualty transit disasters, and nobody stops him because he's very good at leaving before the bodies pile up. Let's head into the next conspiracy. In episode 2, Cars in Every Garage and 3 Eyes on Every Fish, Bart catches Blinky, a 3-eyed fish from the river near the nuclear plant. The fish's mutation embarrasses Burns during his gubernatorial campaign when Marge serves it at dinner, and he refuses to eat it on camera. Burns loses the election. What seems like environmental satire about corporate pollution is actually exposing Burns's decades-long experiment in radiation mutation, where he deliberately contaminates Springfield to study genetic changes in animals and humans, treating the entire town as his laboratory. Blinky's discovery triggers immediate media attention. The fish's 3 eyes make it undeniable proof of radiation contamination. News stations broadcast images of the mutant fish alongside the nuclear plant. Environmental groups cite Blinky as evidence of catastrophic safety failures. Burns faces public backlash not because this is the first mutation, but because Blinky is the first mutation that got photographed and broadcast before Burns could suppress it. Other mutations have existed for years. Blinky is just the one that became undeniable public proof. The plant inspection that follows reveals thousands of safety violations. Inspectors find radioactive waste stored in regular containers, plutonium rods sitting exposed in offices, control systems held together with duct tape, cooling systems that haven't functioned properly in decades. Every single safety protocol that exists to prevent radiation, contamination has been ignored or deliberately violated. That systematic neglect isn't incompetence. It's intentional exposure of Springfield to radiation to study the effects. Burns's reaction to the inspection shows foreknowledge. He's not surprised by the violations. He's annoyed by the publicity. He knew exactly how contaminated his plant was because he designed it that way. The radiation escaping into Springfield's water supply isn't an accident Burns needs to fix. It's the intended result Burns has been maintaining for decades. He acts shocked for cameras while privately understanding that Blinky proves his experiment is working. Other mutant animals appear throughout the series. Squirrels with multiple limbs, birds with extra wings, fish that glow in the dark. These mutations pop up in background shots across seasons. They're not one-time jokes. Their consistent presence showing Springfield's ecosystem has been fundamentally altered by radiation exposure. Every animal in Springfield has some probability of mutation because Burns has contaminated the entire environmental system. The three-eyed fish specifically proves Burns' experiment parameters. Blinky didn't develop a random mutation. Blinky developed a specific reproducible mutation that creates additional functional eyes. That specificity suggests targeted radiation exposure rather than random contamination. Burns is studying how specific radiation levels produce specific mutations. Blinky represents successful replication of a three-eyed phenotype, which means Burns has created multiple three-eyed fish and document the exposure levels required. Homer's health records show impossible radiation exposure without death. Homer works in the plant daily for years. He's been exposed to radiation levels that should kill him within weeks. He survives. His medical records would show catastrophic radiation poisoning if anyone looked. But nobody looks because Burns controls access to employee health information and has been monitoring Homer's survival as part of the human subject research. Homer is living proof that Burns's radiation experiments extend to human subjects. Burns sells the mutation data. That's where his actual wealth comes from, not electricity generation. Pharmaceutical companies pay billions for mutation research. Military applications need radiation exposure studies. Burns has been conducting unauthorized human and animal radiation experiments for decades, documenting the results and selling that data to buyers who can't legally obtain it through ethical research. Springfield residents are unwilling test subjects in Burns's profitable medical research operation. The water contamination is systematic. Blinky lived in the river that supplies Springfield's water. That river flows through the entire town. Every resident drinks contaminated water, bathes in it, irrigates their food with it. Burns hasn't just contaminated the plant's immediate surroundings. He's contaminated Springfield's entire water infrastructure. Every animal and human in Springfield has been exposed to Burns's radiation experiment through water supply contamination. Marge serving Blinky to Burns during the campaign proves the contamination's reach. She caught that fish locally. She cooked it like normal food. She expected Burns to eat it as demonstration that Springfield's environment is safe. But Blinky is grotesquely mutated, and Burns refuses to eat contaminated food, despite claiming the contamination is safe. That refusal proves Burns knows the radiation causes harmful mutations, and he deliberately exposed Springfield while protecting himself. Burns's gubernatorial campaign was about protecting his research. If elected governor, Burns would control state environmental oversight of his own plant. He'd appoint regulators who ignore contamination. He'd suppress evidence of mutations. He'd ensure his experiments continue without interference. The campaign wasn't about political ambition. It was about regulatory capture to maintain his research program. Losing the election means state oversight might eventually shut down his experiments. Springfield's cancer rates would confirm Burns's experiments if anyone studied them. Radiation exposure causes cancer. Springfield has been exposed to radiation through water, air, and food for decades. The cancer rate should be dramatically elevated compared to similar-sized towns. But nobody conducts that epidemiological study because Burns has enough power to prevent researchers from accessing Springfield's medical records. The evidence exists in hospital databases showing cancer clusters. Burns keeps it hidden. The children in Springfield have been exposed since birth. Bart, Lisa, and every child in Springfield has grown up drinking radioactive water, breathing contaminated air, and eating mutated food. Their long-term health effects won't manifest for decades. Burns is conducting multi-generational studies by exposing children and waiting to see what happens when they reach adulthood. Current Springfield adults are his first-generation subjects. Their children are second-generation. Burns is building a database of multi-generational radiation effects using an entire town as subjects. Burns has backup research facilities. Springfield can't be his only experiment. He's too sophisticated, too systematic. He's probably contaminating other towns through other plants he owns. Each location provides different exposure variables, different water chemistry, different contamination levels, different population demographics. Springfield is one of multiple experiments Burns operates simultaneously across regions. He's comparing mutation rates between locations to determine optimal exposure parameters. The plant safety violations aren't violations, they're experimental controls. Every missing safety feature is deliberate. Every ignored protocol is intentional. Burns has engineered his plant to leak specific amounts of radiation into specific environmental pathways. The violations are actually carefully designed exposure systems that look like neglect but function as experimental parameters. Inspectors think they're finding incompetence. They're actually documenting deliberate research infrastructure. Burns's scientists know about the experiments. Smithers knows. The plant engineers know. Everyone working there understands the safety violations are intentional and the mutations are expected results. They've all been complicit in decades of human experimentation. They maintain the systems that contaminate Springfield. They document the mutations. They compile data for Burns to sell. The entire plant operates as a research facility disguised as power generation. Blinky is still living in Springfield's water. Burns lost the election but kept the plant running. The contamination continues. More mutations appear. More residents get exposed. Burns keeps documenting, keeps studying, keeps selling data. The experiment never stopped. It just moved from public spotlight back to quiet operation. Springfield residents will keep drinking radioactive water, keep developing cancers, keep producing mutant offspring, all while Burns collects data and profits from their suffering. That's pharmaceutical testing without consent. That's Tuskegee syphilis study meets Chernobyl. That's an entire town serving as laboratory animals for a billionaire who monetizes their mutations? Blinky didn't embarrass Burns. Blinky exposed Burns's decades-long crime against Springfield, and Burns's only consequence was losing an election that would have let him cover it up better. The radiation experiments continue, the mutations accumulate, and Burns keeps getting richer, selling data from Springfield's contaminated population. Now let's shift over to the next conspiracy. In episode Bart the General, Bart gets beaten up by school bully Nelson Muntz. Seeking help, Grandpa takes Bart to Herman's military antiques store, where Herman reveals extensive tactical knowledge and trains Bart's friends in military strategy, camouflage, and combat techniques. They execute a successful guerrilla campaign against Nelson, forcing his surrender. What seems like kids playing war games is actually two military veterans recruiting children into a training program that teaches real combat tactics, using schoolyard conflicts as cover for building a youth paramilitary organization. Herman's store location provides perfect recruitment infrastructure. It's positioned where kids naturally pass by walking home from school. The windows display military equipment that attracts attention from boys interested in warfare. Herman has structured his business specifically to draw in children who demonstrate interest in military tactics. The store isn't primarily generating revenue from antique sales. It's a recruitment center disguised as a retail operation. Herman's background raises immediate questions. He claims he lost his arm in a war, though the specific war changes depending on who's asking. That inconsistency suggests his military history is more complicated than standard service. He has detailed knowledge of tactical operations, supply chain logistics, and psychological warfare techniques. This expertise level indicates special operations training, not regular infantry. Hermann is trained to train others, which is exactly what he starts doing with Bart. Grandpa's immediate suggestion to visit Hermann reveals established pipeline. Grandpa doesn't hesitate when Bart needs help with Nelson. He immediately knows Hermann is the solution. That instant recognition proves Grandpa and Hermann have coordinated before. Grandpa has probably sent other kids to Hermann for similar training. This is a repeating process where Grandpa identifies children facing conflicts and delivers them to Hermann for tactical education. They've systematized youth recruitment. The training montage shows real military doctrine being taught to elementary school children. Hermann instructs them in flanking maneuvers, supply line management, reconnaissance techniques, and coordinated assault strategies. These aren't playground tactics, these are battlefield strategies adapted for schoolyard execution. Hermann is teaching military science to 8-year-olds without parent knowledge or consent. He's building a trained youth force capable of executing complex operations. The kids absorb this training immediately and effectively. They understand tactical terminology. They execute coordinated movements. They maintain discipline under pressure. That rapid competency proves either exceptional teaching ability or the children had some foundation already. Hermann might have been training Springfield children for years, creating a pool of youth with basic tactical understanding who can be activated when needed. Bart's group just represents the latest recruitment cycle. The campaign against Nelson demonstrates sophisticated operational planning. They establish supply lines for water balloons as artillery. They conduct reconnaissance to map Nelson's movements. They execute diversionary tactics to split his attention. They coordinate multi-pronged attacks that force Nelson to defend on multiple fronts simultaneously. These are combined arms tactics being executed by children. Hermann has successfully created a functional military unit from elementary school students. The treaty signing ceremony mimics real military surrender protocols. Nelson faces Bart across a table. Terms are dictated and agreed upon. Witnesses observe and validate the agreement. This ritualistic formalization of the conflict's end serves dual purposes. It legitimizes the children's military role play as serious endeavor, and it trains them in formal military surrender procedures for future reference. Hermann is ensuring the kids understand how wars properly end through formal agreements. Parent involvement is completely absent, no adult except Grandpa, and Hermann knows about the training. Parents don't question where their children learned military tactics. Teachers don't notice students suddenly demonstrating knowledge of flanking maneuvers and supply chain logistics. The training operates in complete secrecy from normal authority figures. Hermann has created a system where children can be militarized without parental awareness or consent. The schoolyard provides perfect training ground. Real combat is too dangerous. Paintball fields attract supervision. But schoolyard conflicts happen constantly without adult intervention. Hermann has identified that elementary school social dynamics naturally produce conflicts that can be weaponized as training scenarios. Every bully confrontation becomes an opportunity to teach warfare. Every playground dispute becomes a tactical exercise. Hermann isn't creating conflict. He's exploiting naturally occurring childhood violence as educational opportunity. Nelson's defeat doesn't end the trained group's existence. Those kids remain trained. They still know tactics. They still understand military operations. Hermann has created a pool of militarized youth who can be reactivated for future operations. This isn't one-time training for a specific conflict. It's permanent skill installation in children who will carry that knowledge into adulthood. Hermann is building a long-term asset base. Hermann's continued appearances throughout the series show ongoing operations. He provides military solutions whenever Springfield faces conflicts requiring force. He supplies equipment. He offers tactical advice. He's consistently available as Springfield's resident military expert who operates outside official military channels. That continued presence proves his youth training program isn't isolated incident. He's been operating for years and will continue operating. The military antique store provides cover story for equipment procurement. Water balloons are harmless, but the principles being taught transfer to lethal weaponry. Hermann is teaching kids how to use weapon systems, coordinate attacks, and execute campaigns. Currently, they're using water balloons. When they're teenagers and have access to real weapons, they'll have tactical training to employ them effectively. Hermann is building capability that becomes dangerous as the children age. Springfield's willingness to accept Hermann's operation reveals deep dysfunction. A one-armed military veteran who lost his arm under suspicious circumstances is training elementary school children in warfare tactics using schoolyard conflicts as exercises. Nobody objects. Nobody investigates. Nobody questions whether this is appropriate. Springfield either doesn't care about youth militarization or actively supports it as community defense preparation. The implications extend beyond Springfield. If Hermann is recruiting and training children in one town, he might be operating in other towns too. This could be a regional or national network of military veterans recruiting youth for paramilitary training using schoolyard conflicts as cover. Hermann's store represents one node in a larger network preparing children for eventual combat operations that aren't currently specified but will require trained assets. Grandpa's involvement suggests generational continuity. He was military. He's recruiting his grandson into military training. This pattern probably repeats across families where veterans deliver their children to programs like Hermann's. It's multi-generational military culture perpetuating itself through informal training systems that bypass official military recruitment regulations about minimum age. Hermann is recruiting and training people who won't be eligible for military service for another decade. Bart returns to normal life after the conflict ends, but he's been permanently changed. He knows how to conduct reconnaissance. He understands supply chain vulnerability. He can coordinate attacks with multiple units. He's been taught to think tactically about conflict. That's military indoctrination that Bart will carry forever. Hermann successfully militarized an 8-year-old using a bully conflict as justification, and nobody stopped him. Hermann's military antiques store is still operating. He's still accessible to children. He's still offering tactical training disguised as helping kids with schoolyard problems. The next child who faces a bully will get sent to Hermann. The next group of kids will learn warfare tactics. The cycle continues because Springfield has accepted that youth militarization is an appropriate response to childhood conflict. Hermann just keeps building his youth army one schoolyard war at a time. Let's continue with the next conspiracy. In episode Lisa, the Iconoclast, Lisa researches Springfield's founder, Jebediah Springfield, for a school essay and discovers his secret confession. He was actually Hans Sprungfeld, a bloodthirsty pirate who tried to kill George Washington and attacked settlements, including children. She finds evidence proving his skull has a silver tongue, confirming his identity. Despite having proof, Lisa chooses to hide the truth at the last moment to preserve the town's happiness. What seems like a moral dilemma about comforting lies versus harsh truth is actually Lisa becoming complicit in protecting a child murderer's legacy, teaching her that covering up evil is acceptable when the truth is inconvenient. Lisa's research begins legitimately. She's assigned a historical essay about Jebediah Springfield and takes the project seriously. She visits the Historical Society, examines primary documents, and discovers Jebediah's secret confession written in his own hand. The confession explicitly states that Jebediah Springfield was actually Hans Sprungfeld, a pirate who committed murder, attempted to assassinate George Washington, and attacked frontier settlements. The confession includes specific details about his crimes, including targeting women and children during raids. The Historical Society curator immediately tries to suppress Lisa's discovery. When Lisa shows him the confession, he denies its authenticity without examination. He calls it a forgery. He claims Lisa misread it. He attempts to confiscate the document. When Lisa refuses to drop her investigation, the curator becomes openly hostile. This immediate suppression proves the Historical Society already knew about Sprungfeld's true identity and has been actively covering it up for generations. The silver tongue provides physical proof. According to the confession, Hans Sprungfeld had a silver tongue implanted as medical treatment for biting off his own tongue during a piracy incident. If Lisa can prove Jebediah's skull contains a silver tongue, she can definitively prove he was actually Sprungfeld. She plans to exhume the body and examine the skull. This is reasonable scientific verification using physical evidence, but the town immediately mobilizes to prevent her from accessing the body. Springfield's violent reaction to Lisa's investigation reveals how deeply the town protects the false history. When Lisa tries to present her findings publicly, the town forms an angry mob. They scream at her. They throw objects. They call her a liar and a traitor. Adults physically threaten a child for presenting historical evidence. That extreme response isn't about historical accuracy. It's about protecting a comfortable mythology that Springfield has built its entire identity around. They would rather assault a child than acknowledge their founder was a murderer. Lisa manages to access the skull during a parade and confirms the silver tongue exists. She has definitive proof that Jebediah Springfield was Hans Sprungfeld. The physical evidence matches the written confession. She can prove beyond doubt that Springfield's founder was a pirate, murderer, and attempted presidential assassin who specifically targeted children during his crimes. This is documented fact supported by primary sources and physical evidence. Lisa has everything needed to expose the truth. Then she deliberately destroys her evidence and lies to the public. During the town celebration, Lisa has the opportunity to reveal the truth. The entire town is gathered. She has the microphone. She has the confession. She has the photograph of the silver tongue. She can prove everything. Instead, she gives a speech about how wonderful Jebediah Springfield was and how his noble legacy should inspire everyone. She burns her evidence. She buries the truth. She actively participates in continuing the lie about a child killer because telling the truth would make people sad. Her internal justification is that the town's happiness matters more than historical truth. Springfield has built its identity around Jebediah's supposed virtue. Revealing he was actually a murderous pirate would devastate the community's self-image. Lisa decides that protecting Springfield's feelings is more important than acknowledging that children were killed by the man they celebrate. She's prioritizing emotional comfort over justice for victims. This decision permanently changes Lisa's character. She was the moral center of the Simpson family. She consistently argued for truth and justice regardless of consequences. She defended unpopular positions because they were correct. Then she discovered actual evil in Springfield's foundation and chose to hide it. She learned that some truths are too inconvenient to reveal, and that covering up crimes is acceptable if exposure would cause social disruption. That lesson corrupts everything Lisa previously stood for. The victims of Hans Sprungfeld never get acknowledgement. The confession mentioned specific attacks on settlements where women and children were killed. Those people have descendants. Those families have historical trauma from Sprungfeld's violence, and Springfield continues celebrating their family member's murderer as a hero because Lisa decided their feelings don't matter compared to the town's collective mythology. She chose the murderer's legacy over the victim's truth. The Historical Society successfully maintains the cover-up because Lisa joined them. They tried to suppress her research through intimidation and denial. When that failed, they relied on her to suppress herself. And she did. She became complicit in their historical fraud because she couldn't handle the social consequences of being right. The Historical Society taught Lisa that truth is subordinate to social harmony, and she learned the lesson perfectly. Springfield continues celebrating Jebediah Springfield Day annually. Every year they gather to honor a child-killing pirate. Every year they teach children to admire a man who attempted presidential assassination and raided frontier families. Every year they perpetuate a lie that Lisa has physical evidence to disprove, and Lisa stays silent because she decided years ago that protecting the lie is more important than exposing it. Other historical lies probably exist throughout Springfield's records. If the town is willing to cover up their founder being a murderous pirate, what else have they buried? How many other crimes have been whitewashed in Springfield's official history? The Historical Society's immediate suppression of Lisa's research proves they have practiced covering up inconvenient truths. Jebediah Springfield isn't their only lie. He's just the one Lisa discovered and chose to protect. Lisa's academic career is built on this compromise. She's Springfield's smartest student. She gets excellent grades. She wins awards for her research and writing. But she achieved that success by learning when to suppress truth for social benefit. She proved she can find historical evidence, verify it scientifically, and then bury it when revealing it would be unpopular. That makes her useful to institutions that require intelligent people who know when to lie. Lisa learned systems maintain themselves through selective truth suppression. The confession still exists somewhere. Lisa burned her copy, but the original document is in the Historical Society archives. That means future researchers could potentially discover the same information Lisa found. The Historical Society will suppress them the same way they tried to suppress Lisa. And if the next researcher is less willing to lie, the Historical Society will escalate their suppression tactics. They've protected this secret for generations. They'll continue protecting it through whatever means necessary. Hans Sprungfeld's silver tongue is still in the skull. Physical evidence exists that proves Springfield's founder was a murderous pirate. That evidence can't be destroyed without desecrating the grave. So it sits there, permanent proof of Springfield's foundational lie, while the town celebrates above it. Every Jebediah Springfield Day, they're literally dancing on the grave of a child killer while pretending he was a hero. And Lisa made that continuing desecration possible by hiding the truth. The lesson Lisa learned infects the rest of her life. Throughout subsequent seasons, Lisa continues encountering situations where truth conflicts with social harmony. Sometimes she speaks up, sometimes she stays silent. The pattern shows her calculating whether truth is worth social cost. She's lost her absolute commitment to honesty. She weighs consequences now. She's become sophisticated about when lying serves her interests. Hans Sprungfeld taught her that covering up evil is sometimes the smart choice. Springfield was built on a lie by a child murderer, and Lisa Simpson helped keep that lie alive because revealing it would have been uncomfortable. That's not moral complexity. That's complicity with historical evil for social convenience, and Lisa chose it voluntarily after discovering the complete truth. She picked protecting a murderer's legacy over justice for his victims. That makes her an accomplice to every continued celebration of Hans Sprungfeld's crimes. The town doesn't know they're honoring a monster. Lisa knows, and she decided that's fine. Let's roll right into the next conspiracy. In episode Brother from the Same Planet, Homer forgets to pick up Bart from school repeatedly, leaving Bart waiting in the rain for hours. Hurt and angry, Bart joins the Bigger Brothers program and gets paired with Tom, a handsome, fun older man who gives Bart everything Homer doesn't: attention, activities, and validation. Homer becomes jealous and joins the program himself to understand, getting paired with a child he immediately neglects. What seems like satire about bad parenting is actually exposing the Bigger Brothers program as a predatory organization that identifies neglected children, matches them with adult men who create emotional dependency, and exploits the parent-child relationship void for unclear but sinister purposes. Bart's neglect is severe and documented. Homer forgets to pick him up after school in the rain. Bart waits for hours while other kids get picked up by their parents. By the time Homer finally arrives, Bart is soaking wet, shivering, and emotionally devastated. This happens multiple times. It's not a one-time mistake. Homer has established a pattern of abandoning Bart at school, forcing him to wait in weather without shelter or supervision. That's child neglect meeting legal definitions. The Bigger Brothers program targets specifically this vulnerability. Their advertising finds children experiencing parental neglect and offers an alternative male authority figure. Bart sees their ad and immediately recognizes it applies to him. The program has positioned itself to catch neglected children at their most vulnerable moment. They're not helping stable families. They're identifying dysfunction and inserting themselves as replacement figures. That's predatory positioning. Tom appears too perfect. He's handsome, athletic, fun, attentive, and immediately available. He has no apparent flaws or red flags. He's exactly what a neglected child would fantasize about in a parent substitute. That perfection is deliberate presentation. Tom has been trained or is naturally skilled at presenting as the ideal authority figure for vulnerable children. He's whatever Bart needs him to be because he's studied how to manipulate children seeking parental attention. The activities Tom chooses isolate Bart from normal social structures. They go go-karting, camping, to the circus, all locations away from Bart's neighborhood and family. Tom is removing Bart from environments where others know him and could observe their relationship. This is classic grooming isolation. Move the child away from protective networks while building private relationship that others can't monitor. Tom never interacts with Bart at school or in public spaces where teachers or community members would witness their dynamic. Tom's knowledge of Bart's family situation is too detailed and immediate. He knows about Homer's neglect without Bart fully explaining. He understands Bart's emotional needs before Bart articulates them. He anticipates what activities Bart will enjoy before trying them. That foreknowledge suggests either extensive pre-meeting research on Bart or professional training in identifying and exploiting neglected children's psychological profiles. Tom knew what Bart needed before meeting him. Physical contact escalates gradually. Tom starts with high fives and shoulder touches, then hugs, then longer physical contact during activities. The progression is subtle enough that Bart doesn't notice boundaries being pushed, but each interaction increases physical intimacy between adult man and child. Tom is desensitizing Bart to adult male touch through gradual escalation disguised as friendly affection. That's boundary erosion strategy used by predators to normalize inappropriate physical contact. The program has zero oversight. Nobody verifies Tom's background. Nobody monitors his interactions with Bart. Nobody conducts check-ins to ensure the relationship remains appropriate. The program matched an adult man with a neglected child and then provided zero supervision or accountability. That structural neglect enables predatory behavior because there's no mechanism to detect or prevent it. Tom can do whatever he wants with Bart as long as Bart doesn't report problems. Homer's experience proves the program's systemic failure. He signs up to get matched with a child and receives Pepe within hours. The program conducts no background check, no psychological evaluation, no training. They just match Homer with a child based on immediate availability. Homer then proceeds to immediately neglect Pepe the same way he neglects Bart. He forgets about Pepe. He abandons him. He prioritizes his own needs over the child's well-being. The program never follows up or intervenes. This proves the Bigger Brothers program doesn't actually care about children's welfare. They're facilitating relationships between vulnerable children and adult men without screening, training, or monitoring. That's not mentorship infrastructure. That's predator access system disguised as charity. The program provides cover for adults wanting unsupervised access to neglected children by framing the relationship as altruistic mentorship. Tom's final confrontation with Homer reveals his possessiveness. When Homer reclaims Bart, Tom becomes aggressive and controlling. He's not a mentor helping a child maintain family relationships. He's jealous of Homer's paternal claim on Bart. Tom views Bart as belonging to him now because he's successfully replaced Homer in Bart's emotional life. That possessive response proves Tom's relationship with Bart isn't about helping Bart. It's about Tom owning a child's affection. Bart eventually returns to Homer, but the program successfully demonstrated that Bart can be manipulated away from his family when he's neglected. The program identified Bart's vulnerability, matched him with someone who exploited that vulnerability, and nearly succeeded in permanently replacing Bart's father figure. The only reason the relationship ended was Homer's jealous intervention. Without that, Tom would still be Bart's primary male authority figure. The program continues operating. Tom is still out there. The organizational structure that enabled him still exists. Other neglected children are being matched with other Toms right now. The program has no incentive to change because it successfully accomplishes its actual goal, providing adult men with access to vulnerable children without oversight or accountability. That's the system working as designed. Springfield has other neglected children. Milhouse's parents neglect him. Ralph's father neglects him. Nelson's mother neglects him. Every neglected child in Springfield is potential Bigger Brother's target. The program is systematically identifying vulnerable youth and inserting adult male authority figures into their lives without parent knowledge or institutional oversight. They're building a network of adult-child relationships that bypass normal protective systems. The business model raises questions. Who funds the Bigger Brothers program? Mentorship programs require significant operational costs. Staff salaries, facility rental, insurance, administrative overhead. Where does that money come from? If the program genuinely existed for charitable purposes, they'd need major donations or grants, but they operate with no apparent funding source and no accountability to donors. That suggests either the program has wealthy private backers with unclear motivations, or it generates revenue through means not publicly disclosed. Tom's employment status is never explained. He has unlimited time to spend with Bart. He's available whenever Bart wants to do activities. He has money for go-karts, camping equipment, circus tickets. He's not working a regular job because he's constantly available for Bart. That means either Tom is independently wealthy and spending his money on a child he just met, or someone is paying Tom to spend time with Bart. Neither explanation is innocent. The program's name itself is revealing. Bigger Brothers. Not Big Brothers, which is the real organization. Bigger Brothers. The name suggests escalation, improvement, replacement. They're not complementing existing family structures. They're offering bigger, better brothers to replace inadequate family members. That positioning frames them as replacement service, not support service. They want children to abandon their families in favor of program-provided substitutes. Bart's vulnerability to this manipulation proves parental neglect creates predator opportunities. Homer's repeated failures to meet Bart's basic needs made Bart desperate enough to accept attention from any adult male who offered it. The program exploited that desperation to insert Tom into Bart's life. Every neglectful parent creates an opening for predatory programs like Bigger Brothers to access their children. That's why these programs exist. They're not solving family problems. They're exploiting them. All right, on to the next conspiracy we go. In episode Homer Badman, Homer gives the babysitter Ashley a ride home. When he sees a gummy Venus de Milo stuck to her pants, he peels it off, and she interprets this as sexual assault. Despite his innocence and video evidence eventually proving it, Homer faces immediate media trial, public shame, and community ostracism before the truth emerges. What seems like satire about media hysteria is actually a blueprint for weaponizing false accusations, showing every step of how someone can be destroyed socially before facts matter, and demonstrating that even when truth emerges, the damage is permanent. The actual incident is clearly innocent. Homer sees his prized candy stuck to Ashley's pants as she's exiting the car. He reaches over, peels it off, and holds it up, explaining that it's a rare candy he's been looking for. Ashley misinterprets the action as groping. From her perspective in the dark car, Homer's hand reaching toward her without explanation could reasonably seem threatening, but the misinterpretation doesn't make Homer guilty. It makes the situation ambiguous, and ambiguity should require investigation before judgment. Ashley goes directly to media instead of police. She doesn't file a criminal report. She doesn't seek legal counsel. She calls a television show called Rock Bottom that specializes in sensationalized expose journalism. That choice reveals her goal isn't justice, it's public destruction. If Ashley genuinely experienced assault, proper procedure would involve law enforcement investigation, evidence collection, and legal proceedings. Instead, she chose media trial where Homer faces judgment without defense or due process. Rock Bottom immediately broadcasts Ashley's accusations without verifying them. They don't contact Homer for his version of events. They don't investigate the circumstances. They don't review any evidence. They simply air Ashley's claims as truth with dramatic music and editing that makes Homer appear guilty. The media outlet prioritizes sensational story over factual accuracy, because outrage generates better ratings than truth. Homer gets convicted by television before anyone examines what actually happened. The community's reaction is instantaneous and violent. Homer's neighbors immediately believe the accusations. They form angry mobs outside his house. They chant slogans calling him a predator. They threaten violence. Ned Flanders, Homer's usually forgiving neighbor, turns against him. Moe refuses to serve him. Everyone in Springfield accepts Homer's guilt based solely on media coverage without personal knowledge or evidence. They're participating in mob justice without trial. Homer's attempts to defend himself make things worse. He tries explaining what actually happened, but every explanation sounds like excuses. He tries showing people the candy, but they interpret that as him being perverted about candy. His legitimate defense gets reframed as evidence of guilt because once someone is accused, every action gets interpreted through lens of assumed culpability. There's no acceptable defense. Claiming innocence becomes proof of guilt through denial. Marge believes Homer, which highlights how isolated he becomes. His own wife knows he's innocent, but her belief doesn't matter to the community. She's dismissed as standing by her husband despite his crimes. Her support gets reinterpreted as complicity or denial. Homer's closest relationship can't protect him from social destruction because public opinion has decided his guilt. The mob doesn't care what Marge knows. They've made their judgment. The rock bottom editing reveals deliberate deception. They take Homer's interview and edit it to make him appear guilty. They slow down his speech to make him sound creepy. They freeze frame on unflattering facial expressions. They cut his explanations and splice remaining audio to create false confessions. When Homer demands they stop making him look bad, they edit the footage to make it appear he said, "No means yes." That's not journalism. That's falsification designed to maintain narrative regardless of truth. The eventual exoneration comes from groundskeeper Willie accidentally videotaping the incident. Willie films Homer's car from his office window and catches the exact moment Homer removes the candy. The footage clearly shows Homer's innocent action and Ashley's misinterpretation. This is objective evidence that definitively proves Homer's innocence. Willie provides the tape to Rock Bottom, and they're forced to acknowledge their false reporting. Rock Bottom's correction demonstrates how media protects itself while destroying others. They air a segment rapidly listing numerous corrections to various stories, including Homer's case. The corrections scroll by so fast they're impossible to read. The announcer speaks unintelligibly quickly. The segment lasts about 5 seconds before moving on. This technically fulfills their legal obligation to correct false reporting while ensuring nobody actually absorbs the correction. Homer gets cleared through functionally invisible retraction. The damage remains permanent. Springfield's community saw weeks of coverage portraying Homer as sexual predator. They saw 5 seconds of incomprehensible correction. What impression dominates? Homer Badman becomes his identity regardless of exoneration. People remember the accusation, not the retraction. Homer's reputation is destroyed permanently because media trial happens publicly while vindication happens silently. The episode demonstrates every element of weaponized false accusations. Target someone, make public accusation, get media amplification, let mob justice proceed. Ignore defendants' explanations, maintain narrative despite contradicting evidence. Eventually issue minimal correction after maximum damage achieved. This blueprint works whether the accusation is true or false because the process destroys the accused before truth determination occurs. Ashley faces 0 consequences for false accusation. She made claims that destroyed Homer's reputation. She participated in media campaign against him. When video evidence proved her wrong, she faced no repercussions, no defamation liability, no public apology, no acknowledgement of harm caused. She just disappears from the episode while Homer continues suffering the social damage. The system protects accusers absolutely while destroying the accused. This pattern repeats throughout society. Accusations become weapons because the destruction happens before trial. Media amplifies claims without verification because outrage generates engagement. Communities form mobs because participating in public judgment creates belonging. The accused cannot defend effectively because denial is reinterpreted as guilt. By the time evidence emerges, social destruction is complete, and corrections never reach the audience that absorbed accusations. Homer was innocent. He had video evidence proving it, and he still lost his reputation because the process itself is punishment. Whether accusations are true or false becomes irrelevant because the accusation alone destroys lives. That's not justice, that's weaponization of accusation as social execution tool. And the episode shows exactly how the weapon functions from accusation through mob justice through hollow exoneration. Springfield eventually moves on to new outrages. Homer remains in his house. The mob disperses. Neighbors gradually resume normal interactions, but they remember Homer Badman. They remember he was accused, even if they forgot he was cleared. That lingering association never disappears. Homer's reputation carries permanent stain from accusations that were proven false, because that's how weaponized accusations work. The stain is permanent even when the accusation isn't. The gummy Venus de Milo represents what Homer actually is. Innocent person who made innocent gesture that got misinterpreted and weaponized, but it also represents what he lost: his reputation, his community standing, his presumption of innocence. Homer got his candy back. He lost everything else, and Ashley is still out there, still capable of making accusations, still protected by system that destroys accused before examining truth. The blueprint remains functional. The weapon remains ready. And nobody learned that maybe we should investigate before destroying lives. Let's keep the pace and move on to the next conspiracy. In episode Deep Space Homer, NASA faces declining public interest in the space program and decides to send an average American to space. They select Homer Simpson from a pool of blue-collar workers, give him minimal training, and launch him on a shuttle mission despite his obvious incompetence. During the mission, Homer's stupidity nearly destroys the shuttle multiple times, including breaking an ant farm that releases ants in zero gravity and cracking the windshield with a potato chip bag. What seems like a comedy about an idiot in space is actually NASA deliberately sending an untrained civilian to die in space as a publicity stunt, knowing that either his success or death would boost ratings. NASA's selection criteria deliberately targets incompetence. They're not looking for skilled workers who happen to be average. They're specifically seeking the least qualified person possible. When reviewing candidates, NASA administrators explicitly discuss finding someone relatable who will boost television ratings. They prioritize entertainment value over competence, safety, or mission success. That prioritization reveals NASA's actual goal isn't space exploration. It's television ratings through spectacle. Barney Alcoholic is initially selected after screening. He performs exceptionally well in all tests despite his alcoholism. He's intelligent, capable, and handles G-forces and training exercises successfully. He would actually be qualified for spaceflight with proper training, but NASA disqualifies him for minor infraction. Barney drinking non-alcoholic champagne at his celebration gets him removed from the program. That disqualification is pretextual. NASA needed excuse to eliminate the competent candidate so they could select Homer instead. Homer's selection makes sense only as death experiment. He has no education beyond high school. He has no relevant skills. He demonstrates immediate incompetence during basic training. He fails every physical and cognitive test. He's the least qualified candidate NASA could possibly choose. Yet they select him anyway and rush him to launch within weeks. That rushed timeline with incompetent candidate proves NASA expects failure and wants it to happen quickly before public pressure can stop it. The training montage reveals intentional inadequacy. Homer receives maybe 2 weeks of preparation for spaceflight. Real astronauts train for years. They learn complex systems, emergency procedures, physical conditioning, and scientific protocols. Homer learns to eat in zero gravity and not touch things. That's the extent of his education. NASA deliberately provided insufficient training to ensure Homer would fail during the mission. Buzz Aldrin and other real astronauts accept Homer on the mission. These are competent, experienced space professionals who understand the danger of launching with an untrained crew member. They voice concerns but ultimately participate because NASA mandates it. Their compliance proves NASA's authority overrides astronaut safety objections. The actual trained crew becomes endangered by Homer's presence, and they can't refuse the mission without career destruction. The mission disasters prove Homer's incompetence immediately. He breaks the ant farm within minutes of reaching orbit, releasing ants throughout the shuttle. Ants in zero gravity become uncontrollable navigation hazards that interfere with equipment and crew. That's immediate mission compromise caused by Homer touching things he was told not to touch. Then he brings potato chips onto the shuttle despite food restrictions. The chip bag, sealed at sea level pressure, expands in space and explodes when Homer opens it, sending a chip flying into the windshield with enough force to crack it. The windshield crack creates life-threatening emergency. The shuttle's atmospheric seal is compromised. They're losing cabin pressure. Everyone aboard will die from exposure to space vacuum if the crack spreads. Mission control panics. The crew prepares for catastrophic failure. This is exactly the disaster NASA expected when they selected Homer. They knew untrained civilian would cause potentially fatal mission compromise. They launched anyway because either outcome, spectacular death or impossible survival, would boost ratings. Homer's solution to the windshield crack proves his reality. Warping protection extends to space. He takes the potato chip that caused the crack and lodges it into the crack itself, somehow creating perfect atmospheric seal. That solution is physically impossible. Potato chips are fragile, porous, and incapable of withstanding pressure, differential between cabin, atmosphere, and space vacuum. But Homer's chip holds because Homer's protection requires it to hold. God's divine intervention extends beyond Earth's atmosphere. The mission succeeds despite NASA's intention for it to fail. Homer returns safely, the crew survives, the shuttle lands intact. NASA administrators look disappointed rather than relieved. They were hoping for disaster that would generate ratings through tragedy. Instead, they got survival story that generates ratings through inspiration. Either way, NASA wins, but they clearly preferred the death scenario based on their expressions during crisis moments. NASA learned they can gamble civilian lives for publicity without consequences. Homer proved that sending untrained civilians to space might succeed through impossible luck. That success establishes terrible precedent. NASA can now argue that average Americans can safely go to space without extensive training. They can expand their publicity stunt program, sending more unqualified civilians on missions, gambling that cartoon, physics, and divine protection will continue saving them. Eventually, that gamble will fail, and someone without Homer's reality-warping abilities will die in space. The pattern of NASA's decline continues post-Homer. They keep trying desperate measures to maintain relevance and funding. They keep prioritizing publicity over safety. They keep viewing astronauts and missions as entertainment content rather than scientific endeavors. Homer's mission represented peak desperation where NASA literally decided killing a civilian on camera was acceptable if it boosted ratings. That's institutional sociopathy. Springfield never acknowledges Homer went to space and nearly died. No community celebration of his return. No recognition of achievement. No processing of trauma. Homer just comes home and resumes normal life like he didn't face death in orbit. That silence is Springfield's collective amnesia protecting Homer's reality-warping status. If they acknowledged what happened, they'd have to acknowledge that Homer survived impossible situations again. Better to just forget and move on. Homer's spaceflight proves no location is beyond his protected status. Earth, space, alternate timelines, void dimensions. Homer survives everywhere because his protection is fundamental reality constant, not location dependent. NASA tried to kill him by sending him to the most hostile environment humans have accessed. He survived because God decided Homer doesn't die in space any more than he dies in nuclear plants, electrical accidents, or timeline collapses. NASA's willingness to kill civilians for publicity should disqualify them from operating space program. They proved they'll sacrifice human lives for television ratings. They proved they'll compromise crew safety by forcing professionals to work with incompetent participants. They proved they'll provide inadequate training because failure generates better television than success. That's criminal negligence operating under government protection, And they're still launching missions, still making decisions, still prioritizing publicity over safety. Homer survived. The next expendable average American might not. Now, we're stepping into the next conspiracy. In episode Bart the Mother, Bart accidentally kills a mother bird with Nelson's BB gun. Feeling guilty, he takes the eggs home and convinces Marge to let him raise the babies. When they hatch, the birds turn out to be lizards, actually Bolivian tree lizards, and Bart releases them despite warnings they'll destroy the ecosystem. The lizards kill all the pigeons in Springfield, and Principal Skinner declares this good because pigeons were also invasive. What seems like a story about responsibility and redemption is actually Marge teaching Bart that killing has no real consequences if you perform guilt and make token gestures afterward, creating a pattern where death can be fixed through emotional displays rather than accepting punishment. Bart's initial kill is deliberate. Nelson hands him a BB gun and pressures him to shoot something. Bart aims at a bird's nest. He fires. The mother bird falls dead. This is an accident. Bart made choice to aim weapon at living creature and pull trigger. He knew BBs could kill. He chose to shoot anyway. That decision makes him responsible for death regardless of whether he regrets it afterward. The bird is dead because Bart killed it. Marge's immediate response is forgiveness instead of punishment. Bart confesses what happened, expecting consequences. Marge sees him crying and guilt-ridden. She decides his emotional suffering is sufficient punishment. She doesn't ground him. She doesn't confiscate the gun. She doesn't enforce meaningful consequences. Instead, she agrees to let him raise the eggs as redemption project. That response teaches Bart that killing can be forgiven through subsequent good deeds rather than through punishment. The egg-raising project replaces accountability with performance. Bart didn't kill one bird. He killed the mother, leaving babies to die. Taking the eggs looks like taking responsibility, but it's actually substituting one life for two potential lives, treating creatures as interchangeable rather than acknowledging the specific life he ended. Bart's not making amends to the bird he killed. He's distracting from that death by caring for different birds. That's not responsibility. That's moral substitution. The eggs hatch into lizards, revealing Bart's redemption was built on lie. The mother bird he killed was protecting lizard eggs, not bird eggs. Bart spent weeks caring for wrong species entirely. His guilt was based on killing a mother bird. Turns out he killed whatever creature was caring for these lizard eggs. The species switch doesn't change the kill, but it lets Bart and Marge reframe the situation as even more divorced from accountability for original death. Principal Skinner warns Bart that Bolivian tree lizards are invasive species that will destroy local ecosystem. He specifically explains they'll kill all pigeons. Bart has clear knowledge that releasing these lizards will cause environmental disaster and mass animal death. He releases them anyway. That's deliberate choice to cause additional deaths beyond original bird kill. Bart is escalating his death count while calling it redemption. The lizards kill every pigeon in Springfield. That's hundreds or thousands of birds. The pigeon population gets completely eliminated through predation by species Bart released against explicit warnings. He didn't just kill one bird with the BB gun. He killed entire bird population by introducing predatory lizards. His attempt at redemption caused exponentially more death than his original kill, and everyone treats this as success. Skinner's justification reveals Springfield's moral bankruptcy. He declares the pigeon deaths good because pigeons were invasive too. So lizards eating invasive birds balances out somehow. That logic is insane. Two invasive species don't cancel into ecosystem health. Bart eliminated local bird population and replaced it with lizard population that will cause different ecological problems. But Skinner frames this as environmental win because now they have different invasive species than before. Marge accepts this justification. Her son released lizards that killed thousands of animals. Authority figures said it's actually good. Marge agrees and congratulates Bart on successful redemption. She taught Bart that killing the first bird required redemption, but killing thousands more pigeons is fine if someone in charge says the dead animals were problematic anyway. That's teaching Bart to seek authority validation for violence rather than accepting moral responsibility for consequences. The pattern establishes Bart's approach to guilt and redemption. Kill something, feel bad, make gesture, get praised for gesture. The gesture doesn't have to actually fix anything, it just has to look like fixing. Whether the gesture causes more harm is irrelevant as long as authority figures approve. Bart learned this lesson perfectly. He'll use it again whenever he causes harm. Emotional performance plus token gesture equals forgiveness regardless of actual consequences. Springfield never addresses the ecological disaster. They eliminated entire pigeon population. They introduced new predatory species, but nobody discusses long-term environmental impact. Nobody monitors lizard population growth. Nobody plans for future ecosystem problems. They just declared victory and moved on. That's Springfield's consistent pattern. Cause disaster, declare success, ignore consequences. Bart learned this from community that modeled it constantly. The mother bird's death never gets acknowledged again. She was killed protecting eggs. Her body fell. Her life ended. Bart's redemption project completely ignored her as individual life with value. She became prop in Bart's guilt performance rather than victim deserving recognition. Marge's redemption scheme erased the original victim by substituting different animals as redemption objects. The bird that actually died got forgotten in favor of lizards that weren't even her children. Bart's next kill will follow same pattern. He'll hurt someone, he'll feel guilty, he'll make gesture. Marge will approve gesture. The victim will be erased through redemption performance. No punishment, no real accountability, just emotional theater followed by authority validation. That's the cycle Marge established by rewarding Bart's guilt rather than enforcing consequences for killing. The BB gun never gets confiscated. Bart still has weapon he used to kill Bird. Marge let him keep it throughout Redemption Project. That gun could kill again any time. Bart demonstrated he'll shoot living creatures on impulse. Marge's response to that demonstration was letting him retain the weapon while raising lizards that killed hundreds more creatures. She connected no dots between Bart having weapon and Bart causing deaths. The weapon remains available for next kill. Bolivian tree lizards are still in Springfield multiplying. They eat pigeons, but pigeons are gone now. What do they eat next? Other birds? Small mammals? They're predatory invasive species with no population control. Eventually they'll exhaust food sources and either die off or adapt to eating something else. Either outcome causes more ecosystem disruption that traces back to Bart's release decision. The ecological consequences will continue for years. But Bart faced no consequences at all. Marge taught her son that killing is fixable through emotional displays and token gestures. That lesson will corrupt every future moral decision Bart makes. He learned that remorse performance is sufficient redemption regardless of actual harm caused. He learned that authority validation excuses additional harms if those harms target the right victims. He learned that original victims can be erased by substituting redemption projects. That's not teaching responsibility. That's teaching how to weaponize guilt to avoid accountability while continuing to cause harm. Let's carry on to the next conspiracy. In episode Homer versus the 18th Amendment, Springfield discovers a 200-year-old prohibition law is still technically active after Bart gets drunk at a parade. The government sends Rex Banner, a federal agent who immediately implements authoritarian enforcement, checkpoints, raids, imprisonment without trial, and military-style occupation. Homer becomes a bootlegger called the Beer Baron, smuggling alcohol until he's caught. When the prohibition law is finally repealed, Banner is literally catapulted out of town. What seems like satire about prohibition is actually showing how easily communities accept police state control, surveillance, and rights violations when convinced it's for their own good, and demonstrating that temporary emergency powers never remain temporary without violent removal. Bart's public drunkenness serves as crisis justification. He gets drunk on beer at St. Patrick's Day parade and staggers through crowd causing chaos. That single incident, one child getting drunk, triggers activation of 2-century-old law that nobody knew existed. The speed from incident to law enforcement shows pre-planned response ready to deploy. Someone knew that prohibition law existed, knew it was technically active, and waited for justification to invoke it. Bart's drunkenness didn't create prohibition. It provided excuse to implement control structure that was already planned. Rex Banner arrives with military force immediately. He doesn't arrive as regular law enforcement conducting investigation. He arrives as occupying commander implementing authoritarian control. His first actions are establishing checkpoints throughout Springfield, conducting warrantless searches of private homes, and arresting people without due process. These are police-state tactics that violate constitutional rights. But nobody in Springfield challenges the violations because prohibition gets framed as public safety emergency. The community accepts authoritarian control within days. Citizens who loved drinking beer suddenly support prohibition enforcement because Banner frames it as moral necessity. They inform on neighbors, they cheer arrests, they participate in public alcohol destruction ceremonies. Springfield transitions from free society to surveillance state so quickly that most people don't notice their rights disappeared. That speed proves how easily populations accept authoritarianism when it's presented as temporary emergency measure for their protection. Banner's enforcement tactics escalate without legal constraint. He conducts raids based on suspicion without warrants. He imprisons people without trial. He establishes checkpoints that restrict movement without probable cause. These actions would trigger constitutional challenges in functional legal system. But Banner operates with immunity because emergency powers suspend normal rights protections. Once prohibition gets framed as crisis, Banner can violate civil liberties freely. Homer's bootlegging operation reveals prohibition's failure. Despite Banner's military-style enforcement, Homer successfully smuggles alcohol throughout Springfield using bowling ball returns as distribution system. He supplies entire town with beer while Banner's massive enforcement apparatus fails to stop him. That failure proves authoritarian control doesn't accomplish stated goals. It just creates surveillance state that fails at enforcement while successfully violating rights. Banner's investigation methods show police-state reality. He uses informants, surveillance, entrapment, and coerced confessions. He doesn't solve crimes through investigation. He manufactures cases through rights violations. When he finally catches Homer, it's not through legitimate police work. It's through surveillance and informant network that monitored entire towns' activities. Banner caught Beer Baron by treating all Springfield residents as suspects under continuous monitoring. The courthouse scene demonstrates legal system corruption. Homer faces Banner in what should be trial but is actually show trial. No jury, no defense attorney. Banner serves as prosecutor, investigator, and witness simultaneously. Homer gets convicted in minutes based on Banner's testimony without opportunity to present defense. That's not justice system. That's authority figure exercising unchecked power while using courtroom as theater for legitimacy. Prohibition gets repealed not through democratic process but through rediscovery that prohibition law was itself invalid. Someone finds documentation showing prohibition law never properly passed. That technicality doesn't reverse Banner's authoritarian occupation. It doesn't return confiscated property. It doesn't release imprisoned bootleggers. It doesn't compensate victims of rights violations. It just removes legal basis for enforcement going forward. All the harm Banner caused remains permanent while he escapes accountability. Banner's removal requires violence. Springfield doesn't arrest him for rights violations. They don't prosecute him for illegal imprisonment. They physically catapult him out of town. That violent expulsion proves Banner won't leave voluntarily even after his authority evaporates. He maintains occupation until physically forced out. That's pattern with emergency powers. They don't expire when emergency ends. Authority figures maintain control until violently removed. Chief Wiggum immediately resumes his position after Banner's ejection. He says, "This is all your fault," to Banner while taking back his badge. But Wiggum participated in Banner's occupation. He accepted being displaced. He enabled Banner's rights violations through non-resistance. Wiggum bears responsibility for allowing occupation, yet he faces no consequences and immediately returns to power. The system that enabled Banner remains intact under Wigham's restoration. Springfield learns nothing from experience. They accepted prohibition enforcement immediately. They participated in neighbor surveillance. They cheered rights violations. They only rejected Banner when prohibition law got invalidated, not because they opposed authoritarianism. If another emergency justification emerges, Springfield will accept another Banner, implement another police state, and surrender rights. Again, because they never understood rights as fundamental protections worth defending. The Prohibition episode demonstrated blueprint for authoritarian takeover. Create or identify crisis. Frame response as temporary emergency measure. Implement surveillance and control infrastructure. Violate rights under emergency powers justification. Maintain control as long as possible. Resist removal after emergency ends. That blueprint works in Springfield and works in real society because populations consistently prioritize perceived safety over fundamental rights. Banner represents emergency powers' true nature. They arrive quickly. They expand rapidly. They violate rights systematically. They resist expiration. They require force for removal. Banner wasn't aberration. He's what emergency powers always become when implemented without ironclad termination mechanisms and rights protections. Every temporary measure tends toward permanent control unless violently resisted. Springfield's acceptance proves how easily authoritarianism sells. People don't demand tyranny. They accept it when packaged as protection. They participate in surveillance when framed as civic duty. They cheer rights violations when targets are framed as threats. Springfield went from free town to police state within episode length because Banner understood how to market authoritarianism as safety measure. That same marketing works everywhere. Homer's bootlegging represented only form of resistance most citizens attempted. They didn't resist occupation. They resisted prohibition specifically by maintaining illegal alcohol access. That selective resistance means they accepted authoritarian control structure while violating its specific rules. They never challenged Banner's authority to implement checkpoints and conduct warrantless searches. They just wanted beer within police state. That's accommodation with authoritarianism, not resistance to it. The catapult ending treats Banner's removal as comedy, but it required physical violence to expel federal agent who refused to acknowledge his authority ended. Springfield needed literal projectile device to remove occupying force. That's funny until you realize it's documenting truth about emergency powers. They never leave peacefully. Authority figures maintain control until forced out. Banner in Catapult represents every emergency measure that requires violent resistance for removal because voluntary surrender never happens. Let's go ahead and move on to the next conspiracy. In episode The Springfield Files, Homer encounters a glowing alien in the woods saying, "Don't be afraid." He reports it to police who call in FBI agents Mulder and Scully to investigate. After extensive searching, they discover the alien was actually Mr. Burns, emerging from medical treatments that made him glow. Everyone laughs at Homer, the case closes, except the episode ends showing real aliens watching from their spaceship saying Homer's encounter was close. What seems like an X-Files parody with a logical explanation is actually proving the government knows aliens are in Springfield, deliberately created a false explanation using Burns, and continues monitoring alien activity while keeping the town ignorant. Homer's encounter has witnesses and consistent details. He sees glowing humanoid figure that speaks to him. The figure moves deliberately. It communicates. It has distinctive features Homer describes consistently across multiple interrogations. That detailed consistency from Homer, who typically has poor memory and attention, suggests he actually saw something memorable enough to override his usual incompetence. Real encounters create strong memories. Imagined encounters create inconsistent stories. FBI arrival is suspiciously immediate. Local police report alien sighting and federal agents arrive within hours. Mulder and Scully, who typically investigate major cases, get dispatched to small-town single-witness encounter. That resource allocation seems excessive unless the government already has reason to take Springfield alien reports seriously. The FBI knew something about Springfield before Homer's encounter. They were waiting for an excuse to investigate. The investigation spans weeks with significant resources. Agents conduct interviews, set up monitoring equipment, search woods extensively. They're not treating this as delusional drunk's story. They're conducting serious investigation that consumes significant time and budget. That commitment proves the government considers Springfield alien presence credible enough to warrant major investigation resources. They're not humoring Homer. They're pursuing actual intelligence. The Burns explanation appears convenient and rehearsed. He supposedly underwent medical treatment involving oxygen tank, painkillers, and other procedures that made him glow green. That explanation gets delivered smoothly with Burns, demonstrating the glowing effect on demand. But medical treatments don't make people glow green and speak to strangers in woods. Burns's explanation is physically implausible. Cover story that everyone accepts because they want explanation that isn't aliens. The FBI agents accept Burns' explanation immediately without skepticism. Mulder, who typically believes alien explanations, instantly abandons investigation. Scully, who typically demands scientific evidence, accepts medical glow story without verification. Their characteristically out-of-character acceptance suggests they weren't actually investigating to find truth. They were investigating to create plausible deniability. They needed explanation they could point to when closing the case. Burns provided that explanation whether or not it's true. The mob that formed around Homer dissipates instantly after Burns' reveal. Hundreds of Springfield residents gathered to mock or support Homer, depending on their position. They maintained interest for weeks during investigation. Then Burns shows up glowing, and everyone immediately accepts that this proves Homer wrong and leaves. That instant satisfaction with implausible explanation proves the mob wanted to close the case. They were desperate for any explanation that let them stop thinking about aliens. The ending reveals the cover-up's function. Real aliens watch from their ship hovering above Springfield. They discuss how Homer got close to discovering them. They confirm they're actually present and monitoring Springfield. This scene proves everything that happened before was misdirection. Homer saw a real alien. FBI created false explanation using Burns. Everyone accepted false explanation because truth is too disturbing. And aliens continue operating in Springfield while residents believe the cover story. The aliens' dialogue suggests ongoing presence. They're not visiting. They're stationed above Springfield, observing. They reference Homer getting close, implying they've had other close calls. They monitor situation carefully enough to know Homer reported encounter and investigation followed. That sophisticated monitoring of human activities proves extended presence, not brief visitation. These aliens have been studying Springfield for extended period. The government knows aliens are here. The FBI's immediate response, extensive investigation, and ready-made Burns explanation prove coordinated cover-up operation. Someone maintains protocol for handling alien encounter reports in Springfield specifically. That protocol includes dispatching federal agents, conducting thorough investigation to identify witnesses and evidence, then manufacturing plausible explanation to close case while appearing to take encounter seriously. Burns's cooperation proves he's part of cover-up infrastructure. He didn't coincidentally have medical treatment that made him glow green. He volunteered or was recruited to provide explanation for Homer's sighting. That cooperation suggests Burns has arrangement with government involving alien cover-up. Maybe Burns benefits from alien presence through technology or knowledge sharing. Maybe government pays him for cooperation. Either way, Burns is complicit in maintaining Springfield's ignorance about alien presence. Springfield has multiple alien encounters across series. The aliens Kang and Kodos appear in many episodes. Usually those are non-canon Halloween specials, but this episode confirms aliens are actually present in Springfield in regular continuity. That makes every alien encounter potentially real rather than fantasy. The government has been covering up multiple incidents across years, using various explanations while aliens continue studying Springfield residents. The monitoring technology proves advanced capabilities. Aliens track individual human movements and conversations. They know Homer reported encounter. They know FBI investigated. they maintain surveillance sophisticated enough to observe human activities without detection. That technology level indicates aliens are far more advanced than humans and have been present long enough to deploy comprehensive monitoring systems across Springfield. Homer's vindication never occurs. He was correct. He saw aliens. His report was accurate. Investigation proved he was telling the truth. But nobody tells him that. Everyone believes Burns' explanation. Homer is left thinking maybe he was wrong while being right. The government maintains that psychological manipulation deliberately. Keep the witness doubting themselves even when they're correct. That doubt prevents them from pushing the investigation further. The X-Files crossover framing disguises truth revelation. By presenting this as parody episode featuring famous conspiracy investigators, the show provides deniability for revealing actual alien presence. Audiences dismiss it as non-serious crossover event rather than canonical confirmation of aliens in Springfield. That disguise lets show reveal truth while ensuring audiences don't take revelation seriously. It's disclosure through comedy. The pattern explains other Springfield mysteries. Why does Burns have impossible wealth? Alien technology. Why do mutations occur near power plant? Alien experimentation. Why does Homer survive impossible situations? Aliens protecting their primary research subject. Springfield's bizarre reality makes sense if aliens have been manipulating it for years, while government covers up evidence of their presence. The aliens will continue observing. They're running long-term study on Springfield residents with government cooperation. Homer's encounter risked exposing the operation. FBI contained the exposure through Burns' false explanation. Aliens learned to be more careful, and Springfield residents continue being studied while believing their ordinary town, with occasionally weird occurrences. The cover-up worked. The observation continues, and everyone except the aliens thinks Burns' medical glow explains everything. We've just broken down 3 hours of Simpsons conspiracies, from Homer's reality, warping divine protection, to Springfield's alien surveillance, from Frank Grimes' fatal discovery to Lisa's complicity in covering up child murder. Every conspiracy reveals the same truth. Springfield operates under rules that protect some while destroying others, and the characters know it. They've been living in documented horror for over 30 years, and they just keep going because what else can they do? Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.